In the savage empire of Dravenor, weakness gets punished faster than betrayal. Queen Selene Vaelor learned that truth the night her husband condemned her before the entire royal court. Not for treason, not for failure, but for something her body refused to give him. 10 years of loyalty meant nothing when the royal physicians declared her barren. Now watch what happens when a woman the world tried to erase comes back wearing armor instead of shame. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is listening. The storm arrived 3 hours before the diagnosis. Selene stood at the obsidian window of the royal chambers watching black clouds devour the horizon like a hungry beast swallowing the world whole. Lightning carved the sky into jagged pieces. Thunder rolled across the capital like war drums announcing execution day. Rain hammered against stone walls with the kind of violence that made servants cross themselves and mutter about omens. She did not believe in omens. She believed in survival. She believed in the empire she helped build with her own blood and ruthless ambition over 10 brutal years. She believed her husband loved her enough to stand beside her when the world turned cold and vicious. That belief died before midnight struck the palace bells. The throne room stretched vast and merciless beneath vaulted ceilings, decorated with tapestries depicting conquests and slaughter. Crimson banners hung between pillars carved from volcanic glass, hauled from the southern wastes at the cost of 300 lives. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting shadows that looked like specters gathered to judge the living and condemn the weak. 300 nobles filled the marble floor, dressed in silk and cruelty and political calculation. Generals stood at attention along the eastern wall, wearing medals earned through systematic butchery across 4 campaigns. Ministers clustered together near the dais, exchanging whispers sharp as knives sliding between ribs. At the center of it all sat King Theron Draven on a throne built from the bones of defeated kingdoms and the shattered pride of broken dynasties. Selene walked toward him wearing midnight blue velvet and a crown that suddenly felt too heavy for her skull to carry. Her boots echoed against stone like a countdown to something terrible. Every eye in that room tracked her movement, with the predatory attention of wolves watching wounded prey stumble into the clearing. She had stood before this court 1,000 times over the past decade, survived 7 assassination plots, negotiated treaties that prevented 3 wars, commanded respect through sheer force of will and political brilliance that made men twice her age nervous. Tonight felt different. The air tasted wrong, metallic, like blood before it hits the ground. Theron did not meet her eyes as she approached the throne. His jaw was set like granite carved into the shape of masculine resolve. His hands gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned bone white. The wedding ring on his finger caught torchlight. The same ring she placed there 10 years ago when they were both young enough to believe love could build empires stronger than fear. Beside him stood Chancellor Morvis, an ancient serpent wearing human skin and political ambition like expensive cologne. The old bastard smiled at her as she crossed the final 20 feet to the dais. That smile was permission to panic. She had seen that expression before, right before he orchestrated the fall of 3 noble houses who threatened the king's authority. Royal physician Aldrich stepped forward from the shadows holding a leather folder containing the medical verdict on her worth as a human being. He was 60 years old with gray hair and steady hands that had delivered half the noble children currently watching from the crowd. Those same hands had examined her body 12 times over the past year with clinical detachment while she lay on tables staring at ceilings and pretending humiliation did not burn through her chest like acid. Tonight those steady hands trembled as he opened the folder. Theron finally looked at her. His eyes were empty, flat, the eyes of a stranger wearing her husband's face like a mask. Aldrich cleared his throat. The sound cut through whispered speculation like a blade through flesh. Your Majesty, my lords and ladies of the Empire, after 6 months of thorough examination and consultation with the finest medical minds across 3 kingdoms and 2 continents, I must deliver findings regarding Her Majesty Queen Selene Vaelor and the matter of royal succession. Silence crashed through the throne room, harder than thunder shaking the foundations outside. The physician's voice never wavered, professional, detached, like he was discussing crop yields instead of destroying a woman's life before an audience hungry for spectacle. The queen is barren. Her womb will never carry children. She will never bear an heir to secure the Draven bloodline and the future of this empire. Selene felt the words hit her chest like arrows fired from close range. Not because they surprised her. She had suspected for years, had seen the way Theron looked at pregnant noblewomen with hunger disguised as polite congratulations, had endured countless treatments and rituals and medical procedures that accomplished nothing except systematic humiliation performed before servants who gossiped and physicians who pitied her, and priests who suggested her barrenness was divine punishment for ambitions exceeding her station as a woman. But hearing it declared before the assembled power structure of the empire transformed private grief into public execution. The nobles erupted into chaos like a kicked anthill, gasps, whispers, scandalized murmurs spreading like disease through aristocratic crowds. A queen who cannot produce an heir is no queen at all. The bloodline ends with Theron unless he remarries. 10 years of marriage completely wasted on damaged goods. What use is a barren woman sitting beside the throne? She brought this on herself. Should have stepped aside years ago. I heard Lady Evelys Morcant is already being positioned as replacement. The speculation was vicious and immediate. Nobles already calculating new alliances, new opportunities, new paths to power opening like cracks in a dam about to burst. Selene stood perfectly still. She had learned long ago that showing weakness before predators only made them hungrier for blood. She kept her spine straight, her face blank as unmarked parchment, her hands relaxed at her sides even though every muscle screamed to flee or fight or do something except stand there, absorbing humiliation like a target, absorbing arrows. Theron rose from his throne with the slow, deliberate movement of a judge approaching the condemned. The room fell silent again. 300 people holding their breath waiting for the king to deliver final judgment. He descended the steps one at a time. Each footfall echoed like a nail being driven into a coffin. When he reached her, he stopped 3 feet away, close enough to whisper intimately, far enough to make the distance between them visible to everyone watching from the crowd. Physical space communicating emotional divorce. Selene, you have served this empire with dedication that cannot be questioned. Your intelligence helped navigate political storms that would have destroyed lesser rulers. Your courage stood beside me through rebellion and war and endless attempts on both our lives. For that service, you have my eternal gratitude and the gratitude of every citizen who benefits from the stability we built together. She heard the blade hiding behind gratitude like a dagger wrapped in silk. But a queen exists for one sacred purpose above all others, to secure the future of the crown, to provide the empire with an heir who will carry our legacy forward into eternity and prevent the chaos that follows when bloodlines end without succession. His voice was cold, clinical, like he was dissolving a failed trade agreement instead of destroying the woman who shared his bed for a decade. You cannot fulfill that purpose. Your body has made that reality undeniable. Therefore, you cannot remain in the position you currently occupy beside the throne. The words landed like stones dropped into deep water. Ripples of shock spread through the assembled nobles. Some looked delighted at the drama unfolding. Others looked horrified at the brutality of public rejection. Most looked calculating, already reshaping political alliances around the power vacuum opening before their hungry eyes. Selene finally spoke. Her voice came out steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. You are casting me aside like refuse thrown from the palace walls. Theron's expression did not change. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his face. I am doing what must be done for the empire I am sworn to protect. The empire we built together through blood and strategy and 10 years of partnership. The empire that requires an heir to survive beyond my lifetime. And 10 years of loyalty means nothing when measured against your need for a son. Loyalty does not change biology. Devotion does not create heirs from barren wombs. The cruelty of his logic was perfect, unassailable. He had prepared for this moment probably for months. Probably with Chancellor Morvis whispering poison into his ear about dynasty and legacy and masculine duty to bloodline over sentiment. Selene looked into the eyes of the man she loved and saw a stranger wearing his face. Saw ambition and ego and political calculation where affection used to live. Saw the fundamental truth about power that she had been too naive to understand until this exact moment. People will destroy innocent lives before admitting their own weakness. You will exile me then. Cast me out beyond the borders like a criminal. Theron hesitated. For just one heartbeat, something flickered behind his eyes. Regret, maybe. or guilt trying to surface through layers of necessity and masculine pride. But it drowned quickly beneath the weight of crown and expectation and 300 nobles watching his performance. You will be escorted beyond the northern border by morning. You may take one carriage and personal belongings that can fit inside. No guards, no attendants, no soldiers, no claim to royal protection or imperial resources. Someone in the crowd gasped loud enough to be heard across the entire chamber. The northern border meant the Black Veil, the forbidden wilderness where criminals and political exiles disappeared into frozen mountains and were never seen again, where winter killed people within days, where predators hunted anything stupid enough to enter without an army. It was not exile. It was execution with extra steps and plausible deniability. Selene felt rage building behind her ribs like magma beneath stone, preparing to erupt and consume everything. But she had learned to control rage over 10 years of political survival, to compress it into something cold and sharp instead of hot and stupid and immediately satisfying. She smiled. The smile was terrible, empty, the smile of a woman who just stopped pretending the game was fair. How generous, my king. One carriage and certain death in frozen wilderness. Your mercy knows no bounds and will surely be celebrated in the histories written about your reign. Theron's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. You brought this situation on yourself. I gave you every opportunity to conceive an heir. No. You gave me physicians who treated my body like broken machinery that needed fixing. You gave me rituals that humiliated me before servants and nobles and priests. You gave me 10 years of hope that you would value me for something beyond the function of my womb. Her voice was rising now, despite her best efforts at control. The throne room listened with predatory attention to every word. I stood beside you when your own generals plotted assassination, and I uncovered the conspiracy before they could strike. I negotiated the treaty with the southern kingdoms when your pride nearly started a war that would have destroyed everything we built. I survived 3 separate poisoning attempts from nobles who wanted me dead because I refused to play their shallow political games and threatened their comfortable corruption. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the muscle twitching in his cheek, close enough to smell the wine on his breath. And now you discard me before the entire empire because my body will not give you the one thing your ego demands to feel like a complete man. Theron's hand moved to the hilt of his ceremonial sword. The gesture was unconscious. Automatic, a threat made from instinct. But everyone saw it. The king had drawn steel against his queen in everything but literal fact. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even the most jaded nobles looked shocked at the implicit violence of that movement. Chancellor Morvis stepped forward, wearing concern like a mask poorly fitted to his serpent face. Your Majesty, perhaps this delicate matter should be discussed in private council rather than before the assembled court where emotions run. Selene laughed. The sound was broken glass wrapped in silk and madness. Oh no, Chancellor. His Majesty specifically wanted this public. He wanted the Empire to watch him destroy me with maximum visibility. He wanted my humiliation performed on the largest possible stage, so let them watch the entire performance. She turned away from Theron to face the assembled nobles directly. 300 faces stared back at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to schadenfreude to barely concealed excitement at the drama. Look well, lords and ladies of Dravenor. Today you witness what happens to women in this empire when they fail to serve male ambition. It does not matter what you achieve or what you sacrifice or what you endure in service to the crown. The moment your body refuses to cooperate with their dynastic fantasies, you become disposable, worthless, trash to be removed. A few noble women in the crowd looked away uncomfortably, recognition flickering in their eyes, understanding that the same mechanism could destroy them tomorrow. The men looked uncomfortable for different reasons, being forced to acknowledge the cruelty they benefited from. Theron grabbed her arm. His grip was iron wrapped in rage. Enough theatrics. You will not turn this proceeding into your personal stage for grievance. Selene looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face with eyes gone cold as winter. You already turned it into theater when you summoned the entire court to watch my public humiliation instead of handling this privately like a husband who still possessed a shred of decency. I am simply ensuring they remember the performance accurately. She pulled her arm free with a sharp jerk. Then she reached up and removed her crown with both hands. The weight lifted from her skull felt like freedom and devastation happening simultaneously in the same moment. She had worn that crown for 10 years. It had become part of her identity. Her proof that she mattered in a world designed to erase women who could not produce sons. Proof that intelligence and courage counted for something beyond bloodline and womb. Now it was just metal and jewels, empty symbols of power that never really belonged to her. She placed it on the throne behind Theron with careful, deliberate movements. The gesture was final, absolute, communicating surrender and contempt in equal measure. I hope your next queen gives you everything I could not, my king. I hope she bears you a dozen sons who look exactly like you. I hope they grow up to be precisely the kind of men you are raising them to become. And I hope you all deserve each other. The last sentence was pure acid. Theron's face twisted with rage, barely controlled beneath royal composure. Guards, escort the former queen to her chambers. She departs for the northern border at first light. Anyone who assists her beyond the prescribed allowances will be charged with treason against the crown. 6 guards in crimson armor moved forward from their positions along the walls. Men who had once sworn to protect her with their lives. Now they were her jailers, instruments of her removal. They would not meet her eyes as they surrounded her in formation. Selene walked between them with her head high and her spine straight. She would not give the court the satisfaction of seeing her collapse, would not give Theron the pleasure of witnessing her beg for mercy or reconsideration. Dignity was the only weapon she had left. As she passed through the massive bronze doors, she heard the whispers beginning behind her like wildfire catching dry grass. Finally, the king can remarry someone fertile. Poor woman. Barren and discarded like broken pottery. She brought it on herself. Should have stepped aside gracefully years ago. I heard Lady Evelise Morcant is already being measured for crown fittings. The girl is 19 and breeds like livestock, apparently. Perfect replacement. The doors closed behind her with a sound like thunder. The empire continued without her. 300 nobles already forgetting she existed. The carriage lurched through darkness and rain like a coffin being dragged toward an unmarked grave. Selene sat alone on a velvet bench, watching the capital disappear behind curtains of storm and betrayal. Lightning illuminated the city in frozen snapshots that burned into her memory. The palace where she had ruled, the market districts she had walked through during festivals, the lower quarters where poverty festered beneath imperial prosperity, while nobles pretended not to notice the rot spreading through their glorious civilization. All of it vanishing into blackness as the carriage rolled north toward the Black Veil and certain death. She had been given one trunk, one change of clothes selected by servants who could not look at her, a small purse of coins that would not last a week if she somehow survived long enough to need currency. The driver was an old man named Garrus who had served the royal household for 40 years. He did not speak. Did not look at her through the small window connecting driver's seat to passenger compartment. Just drove the horses harder through mud and darkness like he was being paid extra for speed. This was how empires discarded queens. Quietly. Efficiently. With just enough ceremony to maintain the illusion of mercy and legal process. Selene stared at her hands resting in her lap. They were shaking. Not from cold yet, though the temperature was dropping with every mile north. From rage that had nowhere to go except inward, where it began eating her alive from the inside like acid poured into a wound. 10 years. She had given Theron 10 years of her life, had stood beside him through rebellions and political coups and endless assassination attempts, had helped him build an empire feared across 3 continents, had loved him with every piece of herself that still knew how to love after being raised in a noble house that treated affection like weakness. And he had destroyed her with the same cold precision he used to dissolve trade agreements. The carriage hit a deep rut in the road. Selene's head cracked against the wooden panel hard enough to see stars. Pain bloomed across her skull. She did not cry out. Pain was irrelevant now. Everything was irrelevant except the fundamental truth crystallizing inside her chest like ice forming over deep water. She had built her entire identity around being Theron's queen, around serving an empire, around playing the role assigned to her by men who saw women as tools for dynasty and legacy instead of human beings with intrinsic worth. And Theron had just proven that identity was worthless the moment her biological function failed. The storm intensified as they climbed into foothills. Wind rocked the carriage violently. Rain hammered the roof like fists demanding entry. The temperature dropped so fast she could see her breath fogging the air inside the enclosed space. Selene pulled her velvet cloak tighter and wished she had fought harder in that throne room. Screamed louder, refused to leave with dignity intact, made them drag her out in chains so at least some nobles might have felt uncomfortable about the brutality. But what would fighting have accomplished except proving she was emotional, unstable, irrational, exactly what Theron needed to justify casting her aside as damaged goods? The game was rigged from the beginning. She just had not realized she was playing it until she had already lost. Hours passed in darkness and thunder, and the rhythmic sound of wheels struggling through mud. Finally, the carriage stopped. The driver's voice came through the wall separating them. Gruff and uncomfortable, and carrying the tone of a man who knew he was participating in murder but needed the payment too much to refuse. "This is as far as I go, Your Majesty. Northern border is another mile ahead on foot. Path is marked with old stones. Good luck." The last two words sounded like an apology. Selene opened the door. Cold hit her like a physical blow from a giant's fist. The wind carried ice and snow and promised hypothermia within hours. Beyond the carriage stretched wilderness that looked like the landscape of nightmares drawn by madmen. Black trees twisted into shapes that mocked nature and sanity. Cliffs disappeared into fog thick as wool. The path north was barely visible beneath snow and dead vegetation in darkness so complete it felt solid. The driver would not look at her as she climbed down from the carriage on legs that had gone numb from sitting. She reached back inside for her trunk. It was heavy, awkward. She had no idea what servants had packed inside. Probably nothing useful for surviving frozen mountains. Probably dresses and jewelry and items appropriate for a queen who no longer existed. The driver cleared his throat nervously. "I am sorry, Your Majesty, for what it is worth to you now." Selene looked at him, an old man with white hair and eyes that had seen too much cruelty over 40 years of service to still believe in justice or mercy from those who held power. "It is worth nothing. But thank you anyway for the sentiment." She turned toward the path leading into darkness. Behind her, the carriage rolled away immediately. The sound of wheels and hooves faded fast until she stood alone in wilderness with nothing except rage and a trunk full of useless royal possessions and the clothes on her back. This was survival now. No palace, no guards, no empire protecting her from consequences. Just a discarded woman in frozen mountains that killed people stupid enough or desperate enough to enter them. Selene started walking north because there was nowhere else to go, and stopping meant dying faster. Whoop-ack. She lasted 8 hours before the cold began winning the war against her body. Her boots were made for marble floors and royal ceremonies, not hiking through snow and ice and terrain designed to break ankles. Her velvet cloak was designed to look expensive at court functions, not keep a human body warm in sub-zero temperatures. The trunk grew heavier with every step until her arms screamed and her back bent under the weight, and finally she abandoned it beside a frozen stream. She kept walking. The wilderness consumed all sound except wind howling through dead trees, and her own breathing getting progressively more ragged. She had no food, no fire, no idea where she was going except north because the exile order said north, and some broken part of her brain still followed orders even when orders led toward death. The sun never appeared. Storm clouds were too thick. Time became meaningless. Walking became automatic. One foot in front of the other. Repeat until you cannot anymore. Her hands lost feeling first, then her feet. Then her face went numb. Ice formed in her hair like a crown made of winter. This was how Theron killed her without getting blood on his hands or conscience. Exposure, starvation, predators hunting through darkness. The black veil would erase her completely, and the Empire would never know if she died screaming or simply fell asleep in the snow and never woke up. She stumbled over a root hidden beneath snow, caught herself against a tree, kept walking because stopping meant accepting defeat. Her mind began playing tricks born from cold and exhaustion. She saw Theron standing between trees watching her suffer with satisfaction in his empty eyes. Saw Chancellor Morvis smiling from shadows like a demon enjoying hell. Saw the throne room filled with nobles raising glasses to celebrate her death, and Theron's upcoming marriage to young fertile Lady Evelis. Hallucinations. Her brain shutting down from cold. She forced them away and focused on movement. Then the ground disappeared beneath her feet. She was falling through darkness, tumbling. Her body hit ice and rock, bounced, cracked against stone that felt like iron, rolled through snow and dead vegetation until momentum finally stopped her at the bottom of what felt like a ravine or cliff base. Pain exploded everywhere simultaneously. Ribs cracked, ankle shattered, head split open, blood warm against freezing skin. She could not breathe, could not move, could not think beyond the sensation of her body breaking into pieces. Blood tasted like copper and failure in her mouth. So this is how it ends then, alone in frozen darkness, forgotten by an empire I helped build, discarded by a man I loved, dying like an animal in wilderness because my womb would not cooperate with his dynasty. Consciousness started slipping away like water through broken fingers. She did not fight it. What was the point of fighting when the universe had made its judgment clear? Then she heard footsteps approaching through snow. Not hallucination, real, crunching through ice, coming closer with purpose. Selene tried to move her head, tried to see who or what was coming. Her body refused every command. She managed to turn slightly, saw a figure approaching through falling snow. Tall, impossibly broad, moving with predatory grace that made every survival instinct scream warnings. The figure crouched beside her broken body. Eyes like molten gold stared down at her face. Not human eyes, something else entirely. A voice came through the darkness, deep, rough, carrying an accent she did not recognize from any kingdom she knew. Well, look what the Empire threw away like garbage. Selene tried to speak. Blood bubbled past her lips instead of words. The figure lifted her effortlessly like she weighed nothing, arms impossibly strong, carrying her through snow and darkness towards somewhere unknown. You should be dead already, but you are still breathing, still fighting even when fighting is pointless. The world tilted. She was being carried. Movement, direction. Anywhere was better than dying alone in snow. Her vision blurred at the edges. The last thing she heard before darkness took her completely was that strange voice again. Let us see if you are worth saving, discarded queen. Let us see what you become when rage replaces hope. Then nothing. Blackness absolute. Selene woke to warmth and pain competing for dominance inside her shattered body. She was lying on furs, soft, thick, surrounding her like a nest built for something predatory. A fire burned somewhere close enough to feel heat, but not close enough to see flames. The air smelled like smoke and pine, and something wild she could not identify. Something that made her skin prickle with warnings about danger. Her body screamed when she tried to move even slightly. Ribs cracked or broken. Ankle shattered. Cuts and bruises covering every surface of skin. She was alive, but only in the most technical definition. Breathing, heart beating, everything else negotiable. Do not move unless you want to tear open the stitching holding your flesh together. The voice belonged to whoever carried her from the snow. Selene forced her eyes to focus through pain. Stone walls, a chamber carved from rock or built inside a mountain. Weapons hung on iron hooks along one wall. Swords, axes, things designed for close combat. Furs covered the floor in layers. Torches burned in sconces, casting orange light across everything. And standing beside the fire was a man who looked like violence given human shape. Tall, easily 6.5 feet of muscle, and contained threat. Broad shoulders that could carry boulders. Built from actual combat instead of training yards and ceremonial armor. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was brutal and beautiful simultaneously in ways that should not exist together. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw covered in stubble. A scar running from temple to chin on the left side like someone tried to take his face off and failed. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, despite broken ribs. Gold. Not hazel. Not light brown pretending to be unusual. Gold like coins reflecting firelight, like predator eyes catching torches, like something inhuman wearing human flesh as camouflage. He watched her with an intensity that felt like being dissected while still conscious. You are awake. Good. Unconscious people are boring, and I have been waiting 3 days for you to either die or become interesting. His voice carried dry humor underneath the roughness. Selene tried to speak. Her throat was raw like she had been screaming. Where am I? Valdir, fortress of the wolf clans, hidden in these mountains where empires fear to look too closely at shadows. Wolf clans. The words made no sense. Wolf clans were legends, stories told to frighten children, myths used to explain why the northern mountains remained unconquered. He must have seen confusion and disbelief on her battered face because he smiled. The expression made him look absolutely dangerous. You have heard stories your entire life. Every empire tells them. Monsters in the north, beasts that walk like men and hunt like demons. Legends mothers used to frighten children into obedience and borders. He stepped closer to where she lay broken in furs. We are not legends, discarded Queen. We are simply better at surviving than humans, better at remembering what you forgot. That civilization is a thin mask over animal nature. Selene processed that slowly through pain and exhaustion. You are telling me wolves are real, that the myths are true. I am telling you that your empire built itself on a foundation of ignorance and arrogance. You declared these mountains forbidden because you were afraid of what lived here. Then you convinced yourselves nothing lived here at all because acknowledging our existence would mean acknowledging your weakness. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could see flecks of amber burning in those impossible gold eyes. I am Kael Drathmir, Alpha King of the Northern Clans, ruler of territories. Your maps leave blank because map makers fear the truth. And you are Selene Vaelor, the queen your husband threw away like broken furniture that no longer served its purpose. Hearing her situation summarized so bluntly made rage flare inside her chest despite pain. He did not throw me away. He exiled me for political necessity, for the good of the empire. Kael laughed. The sound was sharp as breaking ice. Is that what you tell yourself to make the betrayal easier to swallow? That it was necessary, that it was for the greater good, that your destruction served some higher purpose? It is the truth. The truth is your husband destroyed you publicly because his ego could not survive admitting his own failure. So he made you carry the shame for both of you, made your body the scapegoat for his inadequacy. Selene tried to sit up. Pain exploded across her torso like being stabbed with hot iron. She gasped and fell back against the furs. Kael did not help her, did not move to ease her suffering. I told you not to move. I will not repeat warnings. Why did you save me? Why bring me here instead of leaving me to die? I did not save you. I delayed your death. There is a significant difference between those two things. Then why? Because watching you die in the snow would have been boring. Watching you fight to survive might actually be interesting. Watching you transform might be worth the effort of carrying your broken body through a blizzard. He stood and walked back to the fire with movements that looked like controlled power. Selene stared at the stone ceiling and tried to understand what was happening to her life. She had been exiled, had wandered into forbidden wilderness, had been rescued by something calling itself a wolf king who looked human but had eyes that proved otherwise. None of it made sense according to everything she had been taught about the world. But sense was a luxury she could not afford anymore. How long was I unconscious? 3 days. Your body needed time to decide if it wanted to keep living or give up and save us both the trouble. 3 days. The Empire probably assumed she was already dead, probably already celebrating Theron's upcoming marriage, already erasing her from history except as a cautionary tale about barren women who could not fulfill their biological duty. What happens now? What do you want from me? Kael turned to look at her directly. Firelight carved deep shadows across his scarred face. Now you heal. Then you make a choice that will determine whether you die slowly or become something your empire will learn to fear. What choice? Whether you want to crawl back to the civilization that destroyed you and beg for scraps of mercy from people who celebrated your fall, or whether you want to become something they will regret discarding. Selene felt something stir inside her chest. Not hope, something darker, colder, more dangerous. Ambition wrapped in rage. For 10 years, she had built her worth around being Theron's queen, around serving an empire, around playing the role assigned to her by men who saw women as tools for dynasty and legacy and nothing more. And where had that gotten her? Cast aside, humiliated before hundreds of witnesses, left to die in frozen wilderness. She looked at Kael with eyes that were starting to see differently. What if I want to become something they fear? What if I want them to regret every moment they celebrated my destruction? He smiled again. This time the expression carried approval mixed with anticipation. Then your real education begins, discarded queen. Then we discover what kind of monster you can become when you stop apologizing for taking up space in a world that tried to erase you. Outside the fortress, wind howled through mountain passes like the screams of everyone who ever died in this wilderness. Snow continued falling. The empire celebrated its new beginning under young, fertile Queen Evelise. And inside a chamber carved from stone and fury and centuries of hidden power, a rejected woman began the transformation into something dangerous. Because broken people who refuse to stay broken become the most terrifying force in any kingdom. They have nothing left to lose except the fear that once controlled them. And Selene Vaelor was done being afraid of what people thought, done being afraid of taking up space, done being afraid of the rage burning through her veins like wildfire. Kael watched her face change as understanding crystallized. Good. That look in your eyes right now, that is the beginning of power that empires cannot control. What look? The look of a woman who just realized mercy is weakness and revenge is currency. Is that what you're going to teach me? Revenge? No. I am going to teach you something far more dangerous than revenge. What? How to build an empire from the ashes of your humiliation. How to turn pain into power. How to become the nightmare that haunts every person who celebrated your fall. Selene closed her eyes and felt tears she had been holding for days finally break free and slide down her battered face. But they were not tears of grief anymore. They were tears of rage finding direction. The tears stopped after 3 minutes. Selene wiped her face with the back of her hand and tasted salt mixed with blood from split lips. The crying had accomplished nothing except proving she still had enough water in her dehydrated body to produce tears. Weakness disguised as catharsis. She would not make that mistake again. Kael watched her compose herself with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Better. Tears are useless unless they lead to action. Grief without direction is just self-pity wearing a tragic mask. His words were brutal, deliberately so, like he was testing whether she would collapse under honesty or sharpen herself against it. Selene pushed herself up despite screaming ribs. Pain was irrelevant. Lying down felt like surrender, and she was done surrendering to anything, including her own broken body. How long until I can walk? Kael crossed his arms. Firelight made the scar on his face look deeper, like someone had tried to carve him open and he had survived anyway through pure stubbornness. Your ankle is shattered. Ribs are cracked. You have internal bleeding I had to stop with methods your empire would call barbaric. 2 weeks minimum before you can walk without screaming. A month before you can fight. I do not have a month. Theron will be married to that fertile child within weeks. The empire will move forward without me. If I wait too long, I become irrelevant. Kael laughed. The sound was sharp and mocking. You think you are relevant now? You think anyone in that empire is sitting around worried about what the discarded Baron Queen might do from exile? They have already forgotten you existed except as a cautionary tale. The words hit like fists, but Selene forced herself to hear them. Forced herself to understand that Kael was not being cruel for entertainment. He was removing the comfortable lies she had been telling herself. Then what do I do? How do I become something they cannot ignore? First you heal, then you learn. Then you stop thinking like a queen who served an empire and start thinking like a conqueror who will take one. He moved to a wooden table against the far wall and poured liquid from a clay pitcher into a cup. Brought it to her. Drink. It tastes like poison, but will speed your healing. Selene took the cup. The liquid inside was dark red, almost black. It smelled like copper and earth and something wild. What is it? Wolf blood mixed with mountain herbs. It will help your body repair itself faster than human medicine. She looked at the cup, looked at him, made a decision. She drank it in 3 swallows. It tasted exactly like poison, burned going down her throat, hit her stomach like acid, but she kept it down through sheer force of will. Kael smiled, approval flickering in those gold eyes. Good. Most humans vomit immediately. You have stronger survival instincts than your pretty court manners suggested. Selene set the cup down and met his stare. Tell me about power. Tell me how wolves build empires. Wolves do not build empires. Humans build empires because you are obsessed with legacy and monuments and being remembered after you are dead. Wolves build packs, loyalty structures based on strength and mutual survival. What is the difference? Empires collapse when the leader dies because everything depends on bloodline and inherited authority. Packs survive because leadership is earned through demonstrated ability to protect and provide for the group. So I need to build a pack instead of trying to reclaim a throne. You need to understand what makes people follow someone voluntarily instead of through obligation or fear alone. And what makes people follow? Kael sat on the edge of the stone platform where she lay surrounded by furs. People follow strength, but not the kind of strength your empire worships. Not the strength of sitting on a throne wearing a crown and commanding armies you never fight alongside. Then what kind? The strength of someone who has survived what should have killed them. The strength of someone who understands their pain and refuses to let it destroy them. The strength of someone who makes others feel seen instead of used. His voice carried weight earned through experience instead of theory. Your husband commanded through inherited authority and political fear. People obeyed him because disobedience meant punishment. That kind of loyalty disappears the moment someone stronger appears. But if you can make people follow you because they believe you understand their suffering and will fight beside them instead of sending them to die for your glory, that loyalty survives anything. Selene absorbed that, turned it over in her mind. You are saying I need to become what Theron never was, a leader who earns loyalty instead of demanding it. I am saying you need to stop thinking about revenge and start thinking about building something that makes revenge irrelevant. Build something so powerful that destroying you becomes impossible. But I want him to suffer. I want him to feel what I felt standing in that throne room, being discarded like garbage. Kael leaned closer, his face inches from hers. Then make him watch you build an empire that makes his look pathetic. Make him watch people choose you over him voluntarily. Make him watch everything he destroyed rise from ashes stronger than before. That kind of suffering lasts decades instead of moments. The logic was perfect, cold, strategic. Selene felt something shifting inside her chest, the grief transforming into something harder, sharper, more dangerous than crying or rage alone. How do I start? You already started the moment you drank wolf blood instead of refusing it. Now you keep going, you heal, you train, you learn to fight like someone who has nothing left to lose, and you stop pretending nobility makes you civilized. What does that mean? It means the version of yourself that stood in that throne room playing the role of perfect queen is dead. She died in the snow. What gets built from her corpse is up to you. Outside the chamber, wind howled. Inside, fire crackled. Selene felt the wolf blood working through her system like liquid heat rebuilding damaged tissue from the inside. Teach me then. Teach me how to become dangerous. Kael stood and walked to the weapons hanging on the wall. First lesson. Everything you learned in that palace about power was designed to keep you controllable, polite, civilized, playing by rules created by men who benefit from those rules. We are going to burn all of that and build something new from the ashes. He pulled down a short blade, balanced it in his hand, turned to face her. Second lesson. Pain is information. Your body is screaming at you right now to stay still and heal slowly, but slow healing means slow progress. So you're going to push through pain until your body learns to repair itself faster or you die trying. That sounds barbaric. Barbaric is a word civilized people use to describe methods that actually work. Your empire is built on systematic cruelty disguised as law and order. We are just more honest about violence. He tossed the blade. It landed on the furs beside her. Third lesson. You are no longer a queen. You are a weapon being forged, and weapons do not apologize for having sharp edges. Selene picked up the blade with shaking hands. It was heavier than she expected. The balance was perfect for killing instead of ceremony. When do we start? We already have. The next 2 weeks were education through systematic destruction of everything Selene thought she understood about survival. Kael was merciless. Every morning started before dawn with exercises that made her cracked ribs scream. Push-ups, sit-ups, stretches designed to force her body to repair itself through stress instead of rest. She vomited 3 times the first week. Kael watched with no sympathy. Pain is your body lying to you about your limitations. Push through it or stay weak. Afternoons were weapons training. Her shattered ankle was wrapped tight enough to support weight, but every step felt like knives grinding in the joint. Kael made her practice footwork anyway, made her hold defensive stances until her legs trembled, made her swing practice blades until her arms felt like dead weight. You think your enemies will care that you are injured? You think they will wait until you feel ready? Fight through damage or die bleeding. Evenings were strategy lessons. Kael taught her the psychology of power that noble tutors had never mentioned. Empires control people through shame. They convince you that your worth depends on meeting their standards, that you should be grateful for the scraps of dignity they allow you, that questioning the system makes you ungrateful or damaged. He paced while he talked, energy burning through him like contained lightning. But once you understand that shame only works if you accept their framework, it loses power. Once you realize that their standards were designed to benefit them instead of measure real worth, you can build different standards, better ones. Selene listened and felt old beliefs crumbling. Beliefs about duty, about serving something larger than herself, about earning love through sacrifice, all lies designed to make exploitation look noble. She began noticing things about Kael during those weeks. The way he never stopped moving, the way his eyes tracked everything with predatory awareness, the way he taught through demonstration instead of lecture. One night she asked him directly, "Why are you doing this? What do you gain from teaching me?" He was sharpening a blade by firelight, did not look up. Entertainment, curiosity, the pleasure of watching something broken rebuild itself into something dangerous. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you're getting tonight. But his tone suggested there were deeper reasons he was not ready to share. Selene pushed. "You could have let me die in the snow. Would have been easier than dealing with an injured human woman in your fortress." Kael finally looked at her, gold eyes reflecting firelight. "I have watched empires like yours destroy innocent people for centuries. Watched them grind up anyone who does not fit their narrow definitions of valuable. Usually I do not interfere because humans seem determined to eat each other alive, and I have no interest in saving a species that refuses to save itself." "Then why interfere for me?" "Because you are different. Most people who get destroyed by systems like yours either break completely or spend their lives begging to be let back in. You got angry instead. That anger might actually accomplish something worth watching. You are using me for entertainment. I am giving you tools to become dangerous. What you do with those tools is your choice. If that is entertainment for me, so be it." The honesty was refreshing after a decade of political lies. "What if I use these tools to destroy your enemies instead of mine?" Kael smiled. The expression was predatory. "Then I would know my investment was worthwhile." 3 weeks after arriving at Valdir, Selene could walk without screaming, could fight for 10 minutes before exhaustion forced her to stop, could think about her exile without drowning in grief or rage. Progress. But the fortress was not just Kael and Selene. Other wolves lived in the mountain complex. She saw them during training sessions, watched them move through corridors with that same predatory grace. They watched her back with curiosity and skepticism. A human woman, broken and exiled, learning to fight like her life depended on it, because it did. One of them approached her during afternoon weapons training, a woman named Lyra who looked 30 but moved like someone centuries old. Silver hair, gray eyes that saw through bullshit. "You are the discarded queen." The barren one Theron threw away. Her voice was neutral. No judgment, just stating facts. Selene kept practicing her stance. "I was. Now I am something else." "What are you now?" "Still figuring that out." Lyra circled her slowly, evaluating. "Kael has not trained an outsider in over 200 years. Whatever he sees in you must be interesting. Or he is bored, and I am a convenient project." Lyra laughed. "Kael is never bored. He is the most dangerous creature in these mountains, and boredom is not part of his emotional range. If he is investing time in you, it is because he believes you can become a threat to the empires he despises." Why does he despise empires? Because empires destroyed his family 400 years ago, hunted wolves to near extinction because humans feared anything stronger than themselves. Kael survived by hiding in these mountains and building a new pack from the survivors. He has watched human kingdoms rise and fall ever since. Watched you repeat the same patterns of cruelty disguised as civilization. Selene absorbed that. Started understanding Kael's investment in her transformation. He wants me to destroy Dravenor. He wants you to become proof that the systems you worship are fragile, that power built on oppression and inherited authority can be torn down by someone they underestimated. And if I fail, then you die and he was wrong about you. Simple as that. The bluntness was almost comforting. No false encouragement, no gentle lies. What do you think? Will I fail? Lyra studied her with those gray eyes that had seen too much. Most humans break under the kind of training Kael puts them through. You have not broken yet. That suggests either remarkable strength or remarkable stubbornness. Either way, it might be enough. She turned to leave, stopped, looked back. One more thing. Kael does not show affection the way humans do. He shows it through investment of time and brutal honesty. The fact that he has not given up on you yet means he cares about your survival more than he will admit. Then she was gone. Selene stood alone in the training yard thinking about investment and affection and the strange loyalty developing between her and the Wolf King who saved her life. A month after her exile, news reached the fortress from human territories. A trader who dealt with both wolves and humans brought information along with supplies. His name was Marcus, and he looked like someone who had seen every ugly corner of the world and survived by being useful to everyone. Kael summoned Selene to hear the report. They stood in a stone chamber that served as war room and strategy center. Maps covered one wall. Maps of territories the Empire claimed and territories they feared. The Black Veil was marked as Forbidden Wasteland. Valdir did not appear on any map. Marcus spread parchment on the table. King Theron married Lady Evelis Morcant 3 weeks ago. Big ceremony. Thousands attended. The girl is 19 and apparently already pregnant. Royal physicians confirmed it publicly. The words hit Selene like a blade between the ribs. Pregnant already. While she was here bleeding and training and rebuilding herself, Theron had moved on completely, had replaced her with a younger fertile version who could give him the heir he demanded. Kael watched her face carefully. Say what you are thinking. Selene kept her voice level despite the earthquake inside her chest. I'm thinking that 3 weeks is remarkably fast for confirmation of pregnancy. Almost like it was planned before my exile was even complete. Marcus nodded. Word in the capital is that Theron and Evelis were involved long before your exile. Possibly years. The Baron diagnosis was convenient timing that allowed him to discard you legally and marry his mistress. The revelation should have destroyed her, should have sent her back to tears and grief. Instead, she felt something colder than rage settling into her bones. He was unfaithful for years while I stood beside him, while I survived assassination attempts protecting him, while I negotiated treaties saving his empire. Marcus continued, there is more. The pregnancy announcement came with new laws. Any woman found barren can now be divorced without consent. Property rights for women are being restricted. The new queen is pushing legislation that essentially makes women property of their husbands. Kael's expression darkened. Evelis is securing her own position by ensuring no other woman can threaten her the way you might have threatened her. Brilliant and vicious, Selene had to admire the strategy even while hating everything it represented. What else? Marcus hesitated, then spoke carefully. There are rumors that you died in the Black Veil. Theron is encouraging those rumors. He wants the Empire to believe you are gone completely, so there is no possibility of you returning to challenge his new marriage or the legitimacy of the heir. Selene looked at Kael. He wants me erased from history. Forgotten. Kael nodded slowly. Which means if you return, it will be as a ghost rising from the grave. The psychological impact will be devastating, but I cannot return yet. I am not strong enough, not prepared enough. Then we accelerate your training. Marcus, what is the political situation in the capital? The traitor pulled out more documents. Unstable. Noble houses are fracturing into factions. Some support Theron and the new queen. Others are quietly questioning the convenient timing of everything. The lower districts are suffering under new taxes implemented to pay for the wedding and upcoming royal birth. People are starving while the palace celebrates. Classic pattern. Empire rotting from the inside while rulers throw parties. Kael studied the maps. How long before civil unrest becomes rebellion? Months, maybe. The people are angry but disorganized. They need a symbol, a leader who represents their suffering and has legitimate claim to challenge Theron's authority. All eyes turned to Selene. She felt the weight of possibility crushing down on her shoulders. I am one woman, exiled, declared barren and worthless. How am I supposed to become a symbol of anything except failure? Kale moved to stand beside her. You are a woman the Empire tried to erase who survived anyway. You are proof that their system of judging worth based on biology is barbaric. You are a living reminder that Theron is fallible and cruel. That is not failure. That is the most dangerous kind of power. Marcus added his perspective. The people do not love Theron, they fear him, but fear only maintains control until someone offers an alternative. If you return and offer them something different, they will listen. Selene looked at the maps showing Dravenor's territories, the empire she helped build, the empire that destroyed her. What would I offer them? What makes me different from Theron except gender and fertility? Kale's voice was quiet but certain. You offer them a ruler who understands suffering because you have lived it. You offer them someone who will fight beside them instead of sending them to die for your glory. You offer them proof that strength comes from surviving brutality instead of inflicting it. The vision was intoxicating, dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also the only path forward that did not end with her dying forgotten in these mountains. How long do I have before the pregnancy reaches a point where the air becomes undeniable? Marcus calculated. 6 months until birth. After that, Theron's position becomes almost unassailable. A living heir changes everything. 6 months to transform from broken exile into viable threat. Selene met Kael's gold eyes. Can we do this in 6 months? If you are willing to become something your empire has never seen before, if you are willing to abandon every comfortable belief about who you are supposed to be, if you are willing to become absolutely ruthless, I am willing to become whatever it takes. Kael smiled. The expression was proud and predatory. Then let us build a revolution from the ruins of your humiliation. The training intensified to levels that felt inhuman. 4 hours of weapons combat every morning. Kael stopped holding back, started fighting her like she was an actual threat instead of a fragile human woman recovering from injuries. She collected new bruises daily, split lips, black eyes, cracked knuckles. Every injury taught a lesson. You telegraph your strikes. Your eyes give away your intention. Fix it or die. She learned to hide intention behind blank expressions. Learned to strike from angles that felt unnatural. Learned to use her smaller size as advantage instead of weakness. Afternoons were strategy and politics. Kael brought in Lyra and other wolves who had observed human empires for centuries. They taught her the patterns of power. Every empire collapses the same way. The rulers become isolated from the suffering they cause. They surround themselves with people who tell them comfortable lies. They mistake fear for respect, and eventually someone angry enough and smart enough exploits those weaknesses. Selene absorbed everything, questioned everything, stopped accepting surface explanations. Why do people follow tyrants even when the tyrant is destroying them? Because the alternative requires courage most people do not possess. It requires admitting you have been complicit in your own oppression, that you chose comfort over resistance. Most people would rather blame external forces than accept responsibility for their choices. Harsh, but accurate. Evenings were physical conditioning that made morning combat look gentle. Running through mountain paths in darkness, climbing cliffs with minimal equipment, swimming in frozen lakes until hypothermia threatened. Kael pushed her past every limit she thought she had. Your body is capable of far more than your mind believes. Pain is just sensation. Fear is just chemistry. Push through both and discover what you actually are instead of what you were taught to be. She pushed. And slowly, something new emerged. A woman who moved like a predator, who struck without hesitation, who looked at problems with cold calculation instead of emotional reaction. The discarded queen was dying. Something dangerous was being born. 2 months after her exile, Selene could beat Lyra in combat 3 times out of 10, could run for hours without stopping, could strategize complex political maneuvers that made Kael nod with approval. You are ready for the next phase, which is what? Meeting the people who will form your army, the ones your empire pushed into these mountains and forgot about. Kael led her deeper into Valdir than she had been allowed before, through tunnels carved from living rock, past chambers filled with weapons and supplies. down into caverns that opened into underground cities lit by bioluminescent fungi and carefully maintained fires. Hundreds of people lived down here. Not wolves, humans, refugees, exiles. People who had fled Dravenor and surrounding empires to escape persecution or execution, or systems designed to grind them into dust. They looked at Selene with suspicion and recognition. Word had spread. The rejected queen was here, learning to fight, possibly building something. Kael addressed the crowd that gathered. This is Selene Vaelor. Some of you know her as the queen who was discarded. I know her as someone who survived what should have killed her and chose to become dangerous instead of broken. She is building an alternative to the empire that destroyed her. Anyone interested in joining that effort should speak with her directly. He left her alone with hundreds of suspicious eyes. Selene understood immediately. This was a test. Could she inspire loyalty without Kael's authority backing her? Could she connect with people who had every reason to distrust anyone associated with the crown? She did not try to make a speech, did not try to convince them with words. Instead, she told the truth. I stood in that throne room wearing a crown and believing I mattered, believing loyalty and service meant something. Then my body failed to produce an heir, and everything I built disappeared. Theron discarded me before everyone I thought respected me. They celebrated my destruction. Her voice was steady. No self-pity, just facts. I am not here to convince you I deserve a second chance at power. I am here to learn how to build something different from what we lost. Something not dependent on bloodline or biology or performing for people who see us as tools instead of humans. A woman in the crowd spoke. Old, scarred, eyes that had seen brutality. Why should we believe you are different from Theron? Power corrupts everyone eventually. Selene met her stare. You should not believe anything I say. Beliefs are worthless. Judge me by actions instead. I am here training beside you instead of hiding in safety. I am learning to fight instead of commanding others to fight for me. When we move against Dravenor, I will be on the front lines instead of behind walls. That is not a promise. That is an inevitability. Silence. Then a man stepped forward, young, missing his left hand. I lost this hand in Theron's silver mines. Worked there for 3 years after my family could not pay taxes. He does not even know my name. But you are saying you will stand against him. I am saying I will destroy the system that allowed him to take your hand for profit, that allowed him to treat human beings like disposable resources. The man nodded slowly. Then I will fight beside you. Others stepped forward, one by one, offering skills, offering loyalty not to a crown, but to a shared goal. By the end of the night, Selene had 50 volunteers, fighters, strategists, people with knowledge of Dravenor's weaknesses. It was not an army yet, but it was a beginning. Amat. Kael found her later sitting alone by an underground lake. You did well tonight. Most nobles would have tried to inspire them with visions of glory. You gave them honesty instead. Honesty is all I have left. Everything else was stripped away. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel heat radiating from his body. You are transforming faster than I expected. Most humans cling to their old identities even when those identities are killing them. You are letting yours die. Because the old identity was built on lies. I thought being queen meant something. Thought serving Theron meant building something permanent. All of it was conditional, temporary, worthless the moment I failed to meet biological expectations. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke with unusual gentleness. I have watched empires for 400 years. Watched them destroy countless people who threatened the comfortable lies those empires were built on. Most of those people stayed broken. You're different. You are using your destruction as fuel instead of letting it consume you. Why do you care? Really? What do you gain from my success? He turned to look at her with those impossible gold eyes. Satisfaction. Revenge against systems that murdered my family. Proof that the empires I despise are fragile. And something else I am not ready to name yet. The last part felt important, dangerous. Selene held his stare. You are falling for the broken human woman you saved from the snow. That is what you are not ready to name. Kael's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Acknowledgement, maybe. Falling is a human word. Wolves do not fall. We claim, we choose, we commit, and yes, I have chosen to invest in your survival beyond strategic interest. Why? Because you remind me what courage actually looks like. Not the courage of people born into power who never faced real consequences. The courage of someone who lost everything and chose to rebuild instead of surrender. Selene felt something dangerous happening between them. Connection deeper than teacher and student, deeper than strategic alliance. This complicates everything. Everything was already complicated the moment I carried you out of that blizzard. They sat in silence. Underground lake reflecting firelight. Two broken creatures building something new from ruins. Finally, Selene spoke. Selene, when we move against Dravenor, people will die. People I recruit. People who trust me. Their blood will be on my hands. Kale nodded. Yes. Leadership means accepting that burden. The question is whether their deaths serve a purpose worth dying for. How do I know the purpose is worth it? You do not. You make the best decision you can with available information, and you live with the consequences. That is what separates leaders from cowards. Cowards hide from responsibility. Leaders accept it and carry the weight. Selene thought about the 50 people who volunteered tonight. Thought about the thousands suffering in Dravenor under Theron's increasingly brutal rule. Thought about the choice in front of her. Stay hidden and safe. Let the Empire continue grinding up innocent people, or build an alternative even if it meant wading through blood to create it. The choice was not really a choice at all. I need to see Dravenor again. Need to understand what has changed since my exile. Need to know what we are actually fighting against. Kale smiled. Then we go to the capital, not as Queen and Wolf King, as ghosts gathering intelligence. When? 2 weeks. Enough time to prepare. Enough time to establish networks. Not enough time to lose momentum. Selene nodded. Then let us see what my beloved empire has become in my absence. Let us see what fresh horrors Theron has created while celebrating my death. The preparation for infiltrating Dravenor took exactly 2 weeks. Kael taught her disguise. How to move differently. How to hide her distinctive features behind common clothing and altered posture. How to become invisible through being unremarkable. You were trained to stand out, to command attention. Now you need to disappear into crowds. She learned to slouch, to avoid eye contact, to move like someone beaten down by life instead of someone planning revolution. Marcus the traitor provided intelligence and contacts. People in the capital who hated Theron enough to risk harboring fugitives. Resistance cells that existed in fragments waiting for leadership to unite them. The city is ready to explode. It just needs ignition. Lyra provided weapons. Blades small enough to hide. Poison that killed slowly enough to escape before symptoms appeared. Tools for someone who might need to fight their way out of the capital. Do not die stupidly. If you die at all, make it count for something. The night before they left, Selene stood in the training yard alone. 4 months since her exile. 4 months since standing in that throne room being destroyed publicly. She was not the same person anymore. That Selene had believed in fairness, had believed loyalty mattered, had believed love could survive failure. This Selene understood that fairness was illusion, that loyalty was transactional, that love was conditional. This Selene was dangerous. Kael appeared from shadows, ready to face your demons, ready to become theirs. They left at dawn. 2 travelers heading toward the capital, anonymous, unremarkable, but carrying between them the potential to burn an empire to ash. The journey took 5 days through territories Selene once knew intimately. Villages she had visited during her reign. Towns where people had cheered for their queen. Now she walked through them invisible. Just another refugee. Another nobody ground up by systems designed to benefit the powerful. She listened to conversations in taverns, heard people talking about the new queen, about new laws, about suffering. The taxes are killing us. My daughter died because we could not afford the physician fees. The queen does not care. Why would she? She has everything she needs. I heard the old queen was better. At least she pretended to care about commoners. The old queen was barren, useless. This is better. Selene absorbed it all. The casual cruelty, the acceptance of suffering, the way people blamed each other instead of the system crushing them. Kael walked beside her, listening to the same conversations. This is what empires do. They convince people that their suffering is natural, inevitable, that questioning the system is ungrateful or treasonous. How do we break that conditioning? By showing them an alternative, by proving that the system is not natural or inevitable, by becoming living proof that resistance is possible. They reached the capital on the 6th day. Dravenor looked the same from outside. Massive walls, towers reaching toward sky, banners flying crimson and gold. But inside the walls, rot was spreading. The lower districts were worse than Selene remembered. Poverty visible in every face, children with swollen bellies from malnutrition, adults with eyes gone dead from hopelessness. The palace district was obscene in comparison. New construction, gold everywhere, nobles dressed in silk while people starved 3 streets away. Kael's voice was quiet with controlled rage. This is what Theron built with your help. This disparity, this cruelty disguised as prosperity. The words hit hard because they were true. Selene had helped build this empire, had negotiated the trade deals that enriched nobles while leaving commoners to starve, had stood beside Theron while he implemented policies that created this suffering. She was not innocent, she was complicit, and now she had to decide whether to fix what she helped break or walk away and let it burn. They found the safe house Marcus arranged, a basement beneath a blacksmith shop in the industrial district. The blacksmith was a woman named Kira who had lost 3 children to preventable diseases because she could not afford treatment. She looked at Selene with recognition that felt dangerous. You are her. The dead queen. Selene nodded slowly. I am what is left of her. Kira studied her, then spoke. Good. That woman was useless anyway, too concerned with appearing noble. This version looks like she might actually accomplish something. What do you need from me? Information. Access. Introduction to resistant cells. Whatever you can provide without getting yourself killed. Kira smiled. The expression was grim. Everything I do risks getting me killed. Might as well risk it for something worthwhile. What is your plan? Selene looked at Kael, then back at Kira. Burn it all down. Build something better from the ashes. Make Theron watch everything he built collapse because he underestimated the woman he discarded. Kira's smile widened. Now that is a plan worth dying for. Over the next week, they met with fragments of resistance, people who had been organizing quietly for years, waiting for catalyst, waiting for someone with legitimate claim to challenge Theron's authority. They found Selene, or she found them. The meetings happened in basements and abandoned buildings, whispered conversations about weapons caches and supply lines and people ready to fight if someone would lead them. Selene listened, strategized, started building the framework for revolution, but she needed something more, needed to see Theron directly, needed to understand what he had become in her absence. Kael understood immediately. You want to infiltrate the palace. I need to see him. Need to know if there is anything left of the man I loved, or if that was always illusion. It is suicide. The palace is the most heavily guarded location in the empire. Then help me do it anyway. They spent 3 days planning, studying guard rotations, identifying vulnerabilities, finding the narrow window where infiltration might be possible. The night they chose was a celebration. 6 months since Theron's marriage. The pregnancy was visible now. Evelise showing proudly. The Empire celebrating the coming heir. Perfect chaos to hide 2 ghosts. They entered through servant passages Selene remembered from her reign. Passages nobles never used because they were beneath dignity. Moved through corridors dressed as staff. Reached the upper levels where royal chambers existed. And there, through a partially open door, Selene saw him. Theron stood on a balcony overlooking the celebration, alone for a moment, looking every bit the powerful king he believed himself to be. Selene stepped into the doorway. He turned and froze. Because ghosts are not supposed to walk, and dead queens are not supposed to return. His face went white, then red, then through a dozen expressions happening too fast to track. You are supposed to be dead. Selene smiled. The expression was terrible, disappointed. This is impossible. You could not have survived the Black Veil, yet here I stand, alive, watching you celebrate your new wife and coming heir. Theron's hand moved toward a weapon that was not there. moved toward a guard alarm that would bring soldiers. Selene was faster, blade against his throat before he could scream. Kale appeared from shadows behind her, gold eyes glowing. "Do not make sounds you will regret." Theron looked between them, fear and rage fighting for dominance. "What do you want?" Selene leaned closer, close enough to smell expensive wine on his breath. "I want you to know that everything you built is temporary, that the empire you rule through fear is fragile, that the woman you discarded is coming back stronger than before. And when I return, it will not be to beg for mercy. It will be to tear down everything you represent. You are one woman, broken and exiled. You have nothing. I have rage. I have purpose. I have people who would rather die fighting beside me than live under your rule. That is more than you ever had." Theron's eyes showed panic breaking through arrogance. "If you kill me now, you accomplish nothing. My death makes me a martyr." Selene smiled. "I am not going to kill you, not yet. I am going to make you watch your empire collapse. Watch your allies abandon you. Watch everything you destroyed rise against you. And when you are standing alone with nothing left, then I will take everything you value and burn it before your eyes." She stepped back, removed the blade. "Enjoy your celebration, husband. It is the last one you will know before the reckoning comes." They disappeared into shadows, left him standing there shaking with rage and fear. By the time guards arrived, the ghosts were gone. But the message was delivered. Selene Vaelor was not dead. She was coming back, and she was bringing fire. They made it 3 blocks from the palace before the city exploded into chaos. Bells rang from every tower. Not celebration bells, alarm bells. The deep bronze sound that meant intruders, assassins, threats to the crown. Theron had recovered faster than Selene anticipated. Kale grabbed her arm and pulled her into an alley as soldiers poured into the streets like ants from a kicked nest. Torches everywhere, boots hammering cobblestones, voices shouting orders that echoed off stone buildings. "Find them. The king wants them alive. 50 gold crowns for information leading to capture." 50 gold crowns was more money than most citizens would see in a lifetime. Enough to buy loyalty from anyone desperate enough. And in the lower districts, everyone was desperate. Kael's voice was urgent and controlled. "We need to get off the streets immediately. The safe house is compromised if anyone followed us." "Where then?" He closed his eyes, concentrating. When he opened them again, the gold was brighter. "There's a wolf sympathizer 3 districts east. Underground entrance through a tannery. Follow me and do not speak to anyone." They moved through shadows and back alleys with practiced efficiency. Kael navigating by senses that went beyond human capability. Selene following close enough to hear his breathing. Soldiers passed within 10 feet twice. Both times, Kael pulled them into darkness so complete it felt solid. Both times, Selene held her breath and gripped the blade hidden in her sleeve, but soldiers moved on without seeing them. The tannery sat on the edge of the industrial district, where waste from leather processing made the air thick with the smell of rot and chemicals. Perfect location for something nobody wanted to look at too closely. Kale knocked on a side door. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. A woman opened it. Old, face like carved leather, eyes that had seen brutality and survived anyway. "You are the Wolf King. I was told you might come. And you are willing to harbor fugitives the crown wants captured." The woman smiled without humor. "The crown killed my son for stealing bread to feed his children. I would harbor demons from hell if it meant spitting in Theron's face." She stepped aside. "Basement, through the rendering room. Watch your step. The floor is slippery with fat." They descended into darkness that smelled like death and old blood. The basement was larger than expected. Stone walls, ventilation shafts that led somewhere, space for hiding people who needed to disappear. Kael secured the entrance behind them. Selene leaned against cold stone and tried to process what just happened. "We showed our hand too early. I was stupid, arrogant. I needed to see his face, and now he knows I am alive, knows I am in the city, knows I am building something." Kael turned to look at her. "Yes, you let emotion override strategy. That was a mistake." His bluntness cut, but it was accurate. "So what now? We run back to Valdir and wait for him to prepare defenses?" "No. We accelerate the plan. He knows you are alive, but he does not know how many people support you, does not know what resources you have built. Does not know the Wolf Clan stand with you, assuming the Wolf Clan still stand with me after I just risked everything for petty satisfaction. Kale stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his eyes. It was not petty. You needed to know if any part of him was salvageable, if the man you loved still existed beneath the crown. Now you know he does not. That knowledge changes everything. He was right. Seeing Theron's face had removed the last threads of doubt, the last whispers of maybe he had reasons, maybe he still cared somewhere deep down. None of that was true. Theron had looked at her like a problem to eliminate. Not a former wife, not a human being, just an obstacle between him and the legacy he demanded. Understanding that completely was worth the risk. Selene pushed off the wall. Then we move forward, contact the resistance cells, start coordinating attacks, make him fight on multiple fronts. Kale nodded approval. Now you're thinking like a conqueror instead of an exile seeking validation. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Kyle had contacts throughout the city, people who owed him favors, people who hated the Empire enough to risk everything. By dawn, messages were moving through underground networks. The dead queen lives. She calls for uprising. Anyone willing to fight, prepare. The responses came back faster than expected. We are ready. Tell us when and where. Farmers who lost land to noble expansion. Merchants crushed by predatory taxes. Soldiers who had watched corruption destroy military honor. Workers ground into poverty while aristocrats drowned in luxury. All of them waiting for someone to light the match. Selene read the messages with growing realization. This is bigger than revenge. Bigger than my personal grievance with Theron. Kyle watched her understanding shift. Revolution never starts from individual revenge. It starts when one person's suffering becomes visible representation of systematic cruelty. You are not fighting for yourself anymore. You are fighting for everyone the Empire destroyed. The weight of that responsibility should have crushed her. Instead, it felt like purpose solidifying. She looked at Kyle. How do we coordinate this without getting everyone killed in the first wave? Carefully, strategically, and with willingness to sacrifice pieces to win the larger game. His honesty was brutal but necessary. People will die. The question is whether their deaths accomplish something permanent or just create more suffering. Selene absorbed that, accepted it. Then let us make sure every death counts for something. 3 days after infiltrating the palace, the first coordinated attacks began. Not military assaults. Something smarter. Infrastructure sabotage. Aqueducts supplying water to the palace district mysteriously collapsed. Food warehouses storing grain for noble families burned. Tax collection offices disappeared overnight along with records of who owed what. Nothing that killed civilians. Everything that made the Empire's administrative machinery grind to halt. Theron responded predictably. Martial law. Curfews. Mass arrests of anyone suspicious, which only made more people angry, which created more recruits. The resistance grew like wildfire catching dry grass. Selene coordinated from the basement of the tannery. Maps spread across tables. Messages arriving hourly. Kael beside her translating intelligence and providing strategic insight earned from 400 years watching empires collapse. You're doing well. Applying pressure without overextending, making him react instead of act. But something felt wrong. Selene could not identify what exactly. Just a sensation like standing on ice that was starting to crack. Marcus arrived on the 4th night with intelligence from inside the palace. Theron is panicking. He knows you're organizing resistance but cannot find you, cannot stop the attacks. The nobility is questioning his ability to maintain order. Good, let him panic. But there is more. He has called in reinforcements, mercenary companies from the Eastern Kingdoms, brutal fighters who do not care about civilian casualties. How many? 5,000. Maybe more. They will be here within 2 weeks. Kael's expression darkened. 5,000 trained mercenaries changes the equation significantly. Your resistance fighters are brave, but most are not soldiers. They will be slaughtered in direct combat. Then we do not fight them directly. We use guerrilla tactics. Hit and run. Make the city ungovernable. That works until Theron decides to burn entire districts to root out resistance. Are you prepared for him to massacre civilians to maintain control? The question hung in the air like poison. Was she prepared to watch innocent people die because she started this rebellion? The honest answer was she did not know. Marcus continued, "There is something else, something strange. Chancellor Morvis has been meeting privately with several noble houses, houses that were loyal to you during your reign. I do not know what is being discussed, but the meetings are secret, hidden even from Theron." Kael looked at Selene. Political maneuvering. Either Morvis is building coalition to support Theron more completely, or he is hedging bets in case you win, or he is building something else entirely. The thought crystallized. Morvis was not loyal to Theron, he was loyal to power. And if Theron looked weak enough, Morvis would shift allegiance to whoever seemed stronger. That could be useful, or catastrophically dangerous. Selene made a decision. I need to meet with Morvis, privately, see what he is actually planning. That is suicide. He will betray you to Theron immediately. Maybe. Or maybe he will see opportunity in backing someone with popular support and legitimate claim to the throne. Kael grabbed her shoulders. You are gambling with your life based on the assumption that a serpent like Morvis has principles. He does not. He has survival instinct. Then I appeal to his survival instinct. Show him that backing Theron is a losing strategy, that the mercenaries will not save an empire eating itself from within. How do you contact him without Theron knowing? Marcus smiled for the first time. I can arrange that. Morvis uses me as intermediary for certain transactions he wants kept quiet. I can get a message to him. Do it. Tell him the dead queen wants to discuss terms. Mac. The meeting was set for 3 nights later in a location that made Selene's survival instincts scream warnings. An abandoned church in the Old District. Neutral ground technically, but surrounded by areas loyal to Theron. Kael insisted on coming. If this is a trap, you will need someone who can fight through an army. If it is a trap, fighting will not save us. This is politics. Either Morvis sees value in negotiation, or he delivers me to Theron and collects a reward. Then let me position wolves nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary. Selene agreed to that compromise. The night of the meeting arrived cold and moonless. Perfect for treachery. Selene dressed in clothes that split the difference between nobility and common refugee. She needed to look like someone who had survived hardship but maintained authority. Walking that line was delicate. Kael walked her to within 2 blocks of the church. I will be watching. If anything feels wrong, signal and we extract immediately. What signal? If I scream. That seems obvious. It is supposed to be obvious. He pulled her close. The gesture was unexpected, urgent. Do not die for politics. Die for something worth dying for if you must die at all. I will try to avoid dying entirely. Excellent plan. Then he disappeared into shadows, and she was alone walking toward potential betrayal. The church was exactly as abandoned as promised. Broken windows, collapsed roof in sections, debris from decades of neglect, but candles burned inside, fresh, deliberate. Someone was here. Selene entered through the main doors. They creaked like something from a nightmare about haunted places. Chancellor Morvis stood in the center of the ruined nave, alone, wearing robes that cost more than a farmer's yearly income. He looked exactly as she remembered, ancient, sharp, eyes that calculated profit and loss in human suffering. Well, the rumors of your survival were accurate. I admit I doubted Marcus when he first suggested you lived. His voice was oil over gravel. Here I am, alive, building a revolution, disrupting your comfortable empire. Our empire. You helped build it as much as Theron did. The correction was pointed, accurate, past tense. I helped build something I thought served a greater purpose. I was wrong. Morvis smiled. And now you want to tear it down because you were personally wronged. How delightfully predictable. The condescension made rage flare, but Selene controlled it. I want to tear it down because it is built on systematic cruelty disguised as order. My personal grievance is just the catalyst. Morvis walked closer, circling like a predator, evaluating prey. Let us dispense with the moral posturing. You want power back. I understand that completely. The question is whether you are willing to be practical about obtaining it. What does practical mean? It means recognizing that Theron is weak. The pregnancy announcement was supposed to secure his position, but instead it revealed how fragile his authority actually is. The nobility sees that weakness. They are questioning whether supporting him serves their interests, and you are helping them question it. I am facilitating necessary conversations about leadership stability. Nothing more. You are positioning yourself to betray him when the moment is optimal. Morvis stopped circling, looked at her directly. I am ensuring that when the Empire changes hands, I remain valuable to whoever holds power. That is not betrayal, that is survival. The honesty was almost refreshing. What do you want from me? Assurance that if you take the throne, I retain my position and influence. Assurance that the nobility backing you will not be purged or punished. Assurance that the transition of power happens with minimal disruption to the systems that keep the empire functioning. You want me to promise that nothing fundamental changes except who wears the crown. I want you to be realistic about what is achievable. You can have your throne back. You can have revenge against Theron, but you cannot burn the entire empire to ash and expect something better to emerge. Chaos serves no one. Selene felt the trap closing. This was the compromise every revolutionary faced. Accept the existing system with minor modifications or fight for complete transformation and risk losing everything. What if I refuse your terms? What if I demand actual change? Morvis's expression went cold. Then I deliver you to Theron tonight. He will execute you publicly. The resistance fragments without leadership. The empire continues exactly as it is. Nothing changes except you die. There it was. The ultimatum wrapped in political reality. Accept the system. Play by the rules that destroyed you. Get your personal revenge, but leave the fundamental structure intact. Or refuse. Die. Accomplish nothing. Selene looked at the ancient serpent wearing human skin and understood something critical. This was the test. The real test. Not whether she could build a rebellion, whether she was willing to compromise the values that rebellion represented to achieve partial victory. Kyle had warned her about this moment, about the seductive logic of pragmatism, about how empires absorbed resistance by offering the rebels exactly enough to make them stop fighting. She thought about the messages from resistance fighters, the farmers, the merchants, the workers, people who did not want minor reforms, people who wanted the entire system torn down and rebuilt. She thought about the 50 volunteers in Valdir, the refugees, the exiles, people who had fled because the empire was fundamentally broken. She thought about who she had become over the past 4 months. Not just a woman seeking revenge. A weapon forged from suffering intended to destroy the machinery that created that suffering. And she made her choice. No. Morvis raised an eyebrow. No. I will not accept terms that preserve the system. I will not compromise the revolution to get personal power back. Either we tear it all down and build something better, or I die trying. Those are the only options I will accept. Morvis stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. But it was not the smile of someone amused. It was the smile of someone who just won a bet with himself. I had hoped you would say that. Confusion hit her like cold water. What? I needed to know if you were actually committed to change or just another noble seeking restoration of personal power. You just answered that question. This was a test. Everything is a test with me, child. I did not survive 4 decades in imperial politics by making assumptions about people's motivations. He pulled something from his robes. A document. Sealed with wax. These are the names of noble houses willing to support complete restructuring of the empire. Houses that understand the current system is collapsing and that clinging to it means dying with it. They are prepared to back you publicly if you can demonstrate that you have the strength to win. Selene took the document, broke the seal, read names, half the major noble houses, including 3 of the wealthiest. Why? Why would they support destroying a system they benefit from? Because intelligent people understand that systems which create massive suffering eventually destroy everyone, including the people at the top. Because revolution is coming regardless, and they would rather shape it than be consumed by it. Because you represent controlled change instead of chaos. Morvis stepped back. But here's the reality you need to understand. Those houses will support you only if you can prove you will win. If Theron's mercenaries arrive and crush your resistance, they will abandon you immediately and claim they were loyal all along. Political support follows power. It does not create power. So I need a victory. Something visible that proves the resistance is viable. Not just a victory, a demonstration of strength that terrifies Theron and inspires the uncommitted nobility to pick a side. What kind of demonstration? Morvis walked toward the church doors. That is for you to determine, but you have less than 2 weeks before mercenaries arrive and change the calculus entirely. Use that time wisely. He stopped at the threshold, turned back. One more thing. There is a traitor in your inner circle, someone feeding Theron information about your movements and plans. I do not know who, but I know the information is accurate enough that Theron has avoided 3 traps you set for his supply convoys. The words hit like a blade between the ribs. Who? If I knew, I would tell you. But watch carefully. Someone close to you is selling your revolution for gold or promises. Then he was gone into darkness. Selene stood alone in the ruined church trying to process what just happened. Morvis was supporting her, but conditionally, pragmatically. The nobility would back her, but only if she proved she could win, and someone in her inner circle was a traitor feeding intelligence to Theron. That last piece was the most dangerous, because it meant every plan she made was potentially compromised, every attack potentially walking into a trap. She needed to find the traitor. But suspecting everyone would paralyze the rebellion, Kael appeared from shadows. Well, that was unexpected. I assumed he would betray you immediately. So did I. What did he offer? Support, conditional on proving we can win, and a warning that someone in our group is selling us out. Kael's expression went lethal. Who? He does not know. But Theron has avoided 3 convoy ambushes because someone told him we were coming. Selene watched Kael's face, watched for any flicker of guilt, any sign of deception, saw nothing except rage at the betrayal. But that proved nothing. Kael was 400 years old. He could hide anything if he wanted to. The paranoia was already starting. We need to identify the traitor before planning the demonstration, Morvis suggested. How do we do that without tipping them off that we know? Kael thought for a moment. We feed different information to different people. See which version reaches Theron. Process of elimination. That takes time we do not have. Then we make time by accelerating everything else. They walked back toward the tannery in silence, both thinking, both calculating. Selene's mind was churning through possibilities. Who had access to convoy ambush plans? Who could feed information to Theron without raising suspicion? The list was small. Maybe a dozen people. Marcus was the obvious suspect. He traveled between Wolf territory and the capital, had access to both sides. Could easily be playing them against each other. But Marcus had provided too much useful intelligence, had risked too much, unless that was cover for deeper betrayal. Lyra was another possibility. She had been supportive but not enthusiastic. Could be hedging bets in case Selene failed. Or Kira, the tannery owner, the safe house provider. Perfect position to observe everything and report back. Or any of the resistance cell leaders. People Selene had met once or twice. People she was trusting with her life based on their word and Marcus's recommendations. The paranoia grew. By the time they reached the safe house, Selene had mentally suspected everyone, including herself. This was the poison of betrayal, not just the act itself, the uncertainty that infected everything afterward. Kael must have seen it on her face. Do not let suspicion paralyze you. We move forward with our best judgment and deal with betrayal when it reveals itself. Easy for you to say. You are not the one whose revolution is being sold to the enemy. My revolution is the same as yours now. We are bound together in this. Are we? Or are you using me to accomplish your own goals against human empires? Maybe you are the traitor feeding Theron information so the conflict escalates and destroys both sides. Kael stopped walking, turned to face her directly. If I wanted both sides destroyed, I would simply wait and watch you tear each other apart. I would not waste months training you, would not risk wolf lives supporting your rebellion, would not stand here being accused by someone I carried out of a blizzard and rebuilt from broken pieces. His voice was controlled, but she heard the anger underneath. You are spiraling. The revelation of a traitor is making you question everything, including the people who have proven their loyalty. That is exactly what the traitor wants. Division, paralysis, self-destruction. He was right. She was spiraling, letting paranoia destroy the alliances she had built. But knowing she was spiraling did not make it stop. I am sorry. This is just this. You do not need to apologize. You need to focus. We have less than 2 weeks to plan a demonstration of strength that convinces the nobility to back you publicly. That is the priority. Finding the traitor is secondary. What if the traitor sabotages the demonstration? Then we plan for sabotage. Build redundancy, prepare contingencies, operate as if everything will go wrong and adapt when it does. Selene took a breath, released it, forced herself back to strategic thinking. What kind of demonstration are we talking about? Something visible, something that humiliates Theron publicly, something that proves you are not just a nuisance but an existential threat to his authority. Kale's eyes gleamed in darkness. We need to hit him where it hurts most, his pride, his reputation, his illusion of control, and what hurts more than anything else. We reveal the truth he has been hiding since before your exile. Selene felt something click into place. The physicians lied. I was never barren. He was. Exactly. We prove that publicly. We destroy the entire foundation of his legitimacy. We show the Empire that he destroyed you to hide his own failure. But how do we prove it? The physicians who examined me are loyal to Theron, not all of them. Aldrich delivered the diagnosis publicly, but he was following orders. I have sources who suggest he kept records. Real records. Evidence that the diagnosis was fabricated. Can we get those records? Not easily. They're kept in the royal archives. Inside the palace, under guard. So we need to infiltrate the palace again, steal medical records, get them out without being caught. Selene almost laughed at the absurdity. That is impossible. Kale smiled. Nothing is impossible, just varying degrees of difficult and suicidal. This is more suicidal than difficult, which is exactly why Theron will not expect it. He thinks you will be cautious after nearly being caught last time. He thinks you will hide and build strength slowly. He does not expect you to walk back into the most heavily guarded location in the Empire and steal the evidence that destroys him. The insanity of it was almost appealing. Who do we bring? Who do we trust not to betray this plan to Theron? Kale thought carefully. Just us. No one else. If there is a traitor, they cannot betray a plan they do not know about. Just the two of us against palace security, and the element of surprise. When? Tomorrow night. Before they can reinforce defenses further, before the mercenaries arrive. That is not enough time to plan properly, which is exactly why it might work. Selene looked at him, saw the same lethal commitment she felt building in herself. If we die doing this, then we die accomplishing something worth dying for. They spent the next day preparing, not elaborate planning, simple preparation. Weapons. Light armor hidden under clothing, routes memorized, escape paths identified. Kale contacted wolves positioned around the city, not telling them the plan, just ensuring they would be ready to cause chaos if needed. Selene reviewed palace layouts from memory, identified where the royal archives would be, calculated guard rotations based on patterns she remembered from her reign. Everything felt wrong, rushed, improvised, but waiting felt worse. That evening, Kira brought unexpected news. Marcus is gone. Left the city this morning without telling anyone where he was going. The words hung heavy. Selene looked at KL, the traitor revealing himself, or Marcus sensing something wrong and getting to safety. Either way, one less person to worry about. They left at midnight. The city was under curfew, streets empty except for patrols, perfect for ghosts. They approached the palace from the east. Service entrances, areas where security was lighter because nobles never imagined threats coming from directions that required manual labor to access. Kyle moved like shadow. Selene followed. Their timing was synchronized from months of training together. They killed 2 guards. Quick, silent, necessary. Selene felt nothing dragging bodies into darkness. 4 months ago, she would have been horrified at casual murder. Now it was just tactical requirement. The transformation was complete. They reached the archives without raising alarms. The room was exactly where Selene remembered, filled with documents recording every official act of the Empire for 200 years. Medical records were organized by year and subject. Finding Aldrich's files took precious minutes. Then they had them. Thick folders containing examinations, test results, official diagnoses, and underneath, in Aldrich's own handwriting, the truth. Examination of King Theron Draven reveals severe impairment of reproductive function. Likelihood of natural conception, negligible. Recommendation, pursue alternative succession planning. Diagnosis of Queen Selene fabricated per royal order to preserve masculine pride and political stability. There it was, written proof that everything was a lie. Selene felt rage and vindication burning together. Kale grabbed the documents. We have what we came for. Now we leave before... Alarms exploded through the palace. Someone had found the dead guards, or someone had known they would be here. Kael's expression went dark. Trap. We were betrayed. They ran. Soldiers poured into corridors from every direction, not random patrols. Coordinated response. Someone had told Theron exactly where they would be and when. Kael fought like the predator he was. Blade and claw and 400 years of combat experience. Soldiers fell, but more kept coming. Selene fought beside him, less skilled but more desperate. Every strike was survival. They reached the eastern service exit, blocked, 20 soldiers waiting, the other direction, Western Gardens. They pivoted, ran, blood trailing behind them from wounds accumulating faster than adrenaline could mask. The gardens were maze of hedges and fountains, cover, confusion. They were going to make it. Then Selene saw her. Lyra, standing in the center of the garden path, wearing palace colors, holding a blade. The betrayal hit harder than any physical wound. You were the traitor. Lyra's expression was cold, unapologetic. I was practical. You were leading everyone to slaughter chasing revenge fantasies. I made a deal with Theron, immunity for wolves, territory rights, peace. In exchange for selling out the revolution, in exchange for ensuring wolf survival, which is my actual responsibility, not your human political games. Kale looked at her with eyes gone completely gold. You betrayed Pack, betrayed our alliance, betrayed everything we stand for. I saved Pack. Your obsession with this broken human woman was going to get us all killed. Kyle moved. Lyra was fast, but Kyle was faster. Their fight was brutal, vicious, no hesitation. Selene watched the person she had trusted training her, advising her, supporting her prove that all of it was performance hiding deeper betrayal. The fight lasted 30 seconds. Kyle was stronger, more experienced. He killed Lyra with precision born from necessity. She died quickly, silently. Kale stood over her body. Not triumphant, just cold. We need to move. Her death buys us minutes only. They ran through gardens, over walls, into streets where wolf allies were creating chaos exactly as instructed. Made it 6 blocks before Selene collapsed. She had been stabbed, somewhere in the palace fighting. Adrenaline had masked it until now. Blood was spreading. Too much blood. Kyle caught her. Stay conscious. We are almost to safety. His voice was desperate. Selene looked at the documents clutched in his hand. The proof. The truth. Get those published. Get them to the people. Show them what Theron really is. You are not dying tonight. Then get me to someone who can stop me from dying. Kale lifted her, ran through streets with impossible speed. Wolves materialized from shadows, helping, creating barriers between them and pursuit. They reached the tannery. Kira was there. Saw the blood. Started gathering supplies for field surgery. Kale laid Selene on a table. She looked up at him. Saw fear in those gold eyes for the first time. The revolution continues regardless of whether I survive. You do not get to die after everything we built. Then save me. Her vision was blurring. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Kael's voice raw with desperation. Do not leave me. Not after I finally found something worth protecting besides revenge. Then nothing. Selene woke to agony that felt like her entire body was being torn apart from the inside. Every breath was knives. Every heartbeat was hammers against broken ribs. The wound in her side screamed with infection or poison or both. She tried to move and immediately regretted existing. Kira's voice came from somewhere close. Do not move unless you want to tear open stitches I spent 6 hours placing. You lost enough blood to kill 3 people. Only reason you are alive is wolf blood mixed with herbs nobody in this empire remembers how to use. How long? 3 days. You have been unconscious for 3 days while the city burned. Selene forced her eyes open. The basement looked the same. Stone walls, torches. But something felt different. Tension in the air. Urgency. What happened while I was dying? Kael's voice answered from across the room. Everything changed. We published the medical records, distributed them throughout the city, posted them on every public board, made sure every literate person and half the illiterate ones knew the truth about Theron's fertility. And the city exploded, not metaphorically. Actual riots. The lower districts rose up immediately. Workers abandoned their posts. Merchants closed shops in protest. Even some soldiers deserted when they realized they had been serving a king who destroyed his wife to hide his own inadequacy. Kael moved into her field of vision. He looked exhausted, dark circles under gold eyes, blood on his clothes, but alive, functional. Theron declared martial law, started executing people publicly for sedition, burned 3 neighborhoods to make examples. The brutality only made more people join the resistance. How many dead? Hundreds, maybe more. The palace is not releasing accurate numbers. Selene felt the weight of those deaths settling on her chest. Hundreds of people dead because she started this revolution, because she published truth that shattered comfortable lies. The mathematics of rebellion were brutal. Every action had a body count. The question was whether those bodies bought progress or just created more suffering. She forced herself to sit up despite screaming pain. Where are we strategically? What is the actual situation? Kael pulled over maps marked with colored pins showing territory control. Red is loyalist areas. Palace District. Noble estates. Parts of the military quarter. Blue is resistance controlled. Lower districts. Industrial zones. Dock areas. Gray is contested. Fighting happening daily. The map showed a city tearing itself apart. Red and blue bleeding into each other. Gray spreading like infection. The mercenaries. When do they arrive? 4 days. Maybe 3. Theron is paying triple rates for speed. 5,000 trained killers who will not hesitate to massacre civilians. So we have 3 days to win this revolution, or it gets crushed under professional military force. Kael nodded grimly. Which brings us to the critical decision. Do we consolidate what we control and prepare for siege? Or do we push for the palace now, while Theron is still reeling? Pushing means exposing our forces to counterattack. We could lose everything. Consolidating means giving him time to reinforce, giving the mercenaries time to arrive, giving fear time to erode civilian support. Both options were terrible. Both could end in catastrophic failure. This was leadership, choosing between bad options and living with consequences. Selene looked at the maps, thought about the people who had joined the resistance, thought about the hundreds already dead, thought about what would happen if they lost. We push for the palace. We end this before the mercenaries arrive. We take Theron down now, or we die trying. Kael smiled. The expression was proud and lethal. I was hoping you would say that. He gestured to someone in the shadows. A figure stepped forward. Marcus. The traitor looked rough. Clothes torn, bruises on his face, but alive. Selene's hand moved toward a weapon that was not there. You disappeared, right before we walked into Lyra's betrayal. Convenient timing. Marcus raised his hand slowly. I disappeared because I discovered Lyra was the traitor, and went to verify before making accusations. By the time I confirmed it and returned, you were already gone. I have been coordinating resistance cells ever since trying to keep this movement from fragmenting. Kael confirmed. He is telling the truth. I had wolves verify his movements. He was gathering intelligence, not selling us out. The relief was immediate and uncomfortable. She had been ready to execute Marcus based on suspicion. The paranoia from betrayal had almost made her kill an ally. This was the poison Lyra's treachery left behind. Constant doubt. Inability to trust. Selene forced it down. What is the plan for taking the palace? Marcus spread additional maps showing palace layout in detail. The palace has 3 defensive layers. Outer walls manned by regular soldiers. Inner courtyards with elite guards. And the throne room itself where Theron has concentrated his most loyal fighters. How many total defenders? Maybe 2,000. But they are entrenched, fortified, fighting from prepared positions. And we have how many fighters? Marcus glanced at Kael. 4,000. Maybe 5 if we count civilians willing to fight but untrained. But most of our people are not soldiers. They are workers and merchants and refugees. Brave but not prepared for siege warfare. So we are asking untrained civilians to assault fortified positions defended by professional soldiers. This is suicide. Kale cut in. It is only suicide if we fight conventionally, if we try to match them strength against strength. Then how do we fight? We use what they do not expect. We use the fact that half the palace staff are servants who hate Theron. We use secret passages you know from living there. We use wolf abilities that humans cannot counter. We turn their fortifications into traps. Selene processed that. You are talking about infiltration and sabotage followed by coordinated assault. Exactly. Small teams enter through passages, disable defenses from inside, open gates. Then the main force pours through before they can recover. It could work, or it could get everyone killed in the first 5 minutes. Those are the only 2 options available. Selene looked at Marcus. Can you coordinate the main force? Keep them ready to move on signal. Marcus nodded. I have been preparing for exactly this. Every resistance cell knows their role. They are just waiting for the order. And the wolf clans. How many can fight? Kael's expression was grim. After Lyra's betrayal, trust is damaged. But I still command loyalty from 300 wolves willing to fight. They will follow if I lead. 300 wolves against 2,000 soldiers. The mathematics were brutal, but wolves were not human. Each one was worth 10 soldiers in close combat. When do we move? Kael looked at her injuries. You can barely stand. You are not fighting in this condition. Watch me. You will get yourself killed. Then I die accomplishing something instead of surviving as a coward. The argument was old, familiar. Kael knew he could not change her mind. Tomorrow night. Gives us time to position teams, time for you to heal slightly, time to coordinate signals. One day. One day to prepare for the battle that would determine everything. Selene nodded. Then let us make sure everyone understands the stakes. This is not about restoring my crown. This is about destroying a system built on cruelty. If we win, we rebuild from nothing. If we lose, we die and the empire continues grinding up innocent people. Understanding the difference between personal revenge and systematic change was critical. Revenge was temporary satisfaction. Change was permanent transformation bought with blood and sacrifice. The people gathering to fight needed to understand they were not fighting for a person. They were fighting for a principle. That systems designed to benefit the powerful at the expense of everyone else could be torn down and replaced. That was worth dying for. That was worth killing for. The next day passed in frantic preparation. Selene could barely walk but forced herself to move anyway. Pain was irrelevant compared to what was coming. Kyle tried to make her rest. She ignored him. Fighters gathered in basements and abandoned buildings throughout Blue Territory. Most looked terrified. Some looked determined. A few looked eager for violence regardless of cause. Selene spoke to as many groups as she could reach. Tomorrow we take the palace. Many of us will die. That is not a maybe. That is certainty. The question is whether our deaths accomplish something permanent or just add to the body count of people this empire has destroyed. Her voice was raw but steady. I am not promising victory. I am not promising that surviving will make your lives better immediately. I am promising that if we win, we tear down the system that allowed Theron to execute people for stealing bread to feed starving children. We tear down the system that made barrenness a crime worthy of exile. We tear down the system that treats human beings like disposable resources. She looked at faces, saw people absorbing her words. If that is worth dying for, stand with me tomorrow. If not, no one will judge you for choosing survival. But make your choice now because tomorrow there is no time for doubt. No one left. Every person in that room chose to stay, chose to fight, chose potential death over continued oppression. The courage of ordinary people was staggering. These were not soldiers trained for combat. These were farmers and bakers and dock workers who had simply reached the limit of what they could endure. Rebellion never started with warriors. It started with people who had nothing left to lose except the fear that once controlled them. That night, Kyle found Selene alone reviewing maps for the 100th time. You should sleep. Tomorrow will demand everything you have. Sleep feels like wasting time. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. I have fought in dozens of battles over 400 years, led warriors into conflicts where survival seemed impossible. Tomorrow is different. How? Because I actually care if we lose. Usually I am detached, observing. Tomorrow if you die, part of me dies with you. The honesty was raw, vulnerable. Selene turned to look at him. When this started, you saved me because you were curious, entertained by watching someone broken rebuild themselves. When did that change? Somewhere between watching you refuse to surrender and watching you choose principles over pragmatism. Somewhere between training sessions and strategy discussions. You stopped being a project and became something I did not expect. What? Home. Purpose. The first thing in centuries that made me believe building something might be worth the effort. Selene felt tears threatening, pushed them back. If I die tomorrow... When you survive tomorrow, we rebuild this empire into something that does not destroy people for biological failures. You cannot promise I survive. No, but I can promise I will do everything in my power to make sure you do. He pulled her close. She let herself lean into him despite the pain it caused her injuries. They sat in silence. Two broken creatures who found each other in wilderness and built something dangerous from shared suffering. Tomorrow they would either change the world or die trying. Both options were acceptable. The assault began 2 hours before dawn. Teams moved through darkness toward positions they had memorized. Selene led one team through servants' passages she knew from years living in the palace. Kale led wolves through the eastern gardens. Marcus coordinated the main force waiting for the signal. Everything depended on timing, on silence, on nobody making mistakes. Selene's team consisted of 12 fighters. 6 had actual combat training. The rest were volunteers who could barely hold weapons. She moved through narrow passages, remembering how she used to walk these halls as queen, how different the world looked from the other side of power. They reached the inner courtyard access point, a hidden door behind false stonework. Selene pressed the mechanism. The door opened silently. Beyond lay the courtyard, guards patrolling, torches burning, fortifications that looked impenetrable from outside but were vulnerable from within. This was the moment. Commit or retreat. She looked at her team, saw fear and determination in equal measure. We disable the gate mechanism, kill anyone who tries to stop us, signal the main force, stay alive if possible. Not inspiring words, but honest ones. They moved. The first 2 guards died silently. Throats cut before they could scream. The team spread out heading toward the gate controls. Then someone made noise, a boot scraping stone, a weapon clattering. Alarms exploded through the palace. Guards poured into the courtyard. The element of surprise was gone, but they were already committed. Selene fought with desperate efficiency. Every movement was calculated conservation of energy because her body was still broken and bleeding through bandages. But rage compensated for physical limitation. Rage at Theron. Rage at the system. Rage at every moment of humiliation and suffering that led to this point. She killed 3 guards, took wounds that should have dropped her, kept moving through pure stubborn refusal to fall. Her team reached the gate controls, started working the mechanism. More guards arrived. Too many. This was going bad fast. Then wolves poured into the courtyard from the gardens, Kael leading them, gold eyes blazing, moving like violence incarnate. The guards broke. Professional soldiers reduced to panic by predators that should not exist. The gate mechanism released. Marcus and the main force charged through, 4,000 resistance fighters flooding into the palace, overwhelming defenders through sheer numbers and desperation. The battle became chaos. No formations, no strategy, just brutal close combat in corridors and courtyards. Selene lost track of her team, lost track of everything except survival. She fought beside people whose names she did not know, killed soldiers who were just following orders, absorbed wounds that accumulated faster than adrenaline could mask. Blood everywhere, screaming, the smell of death thick as fog. This was war. Not the glorified version told in stories, the ugly reality of human beings tearing each other apart over competing visions of how society should function. She pushed deeper into the palace, heading toward the throne room, heading toward Theron. Others followed, a growing wave of fighters who understood that killing the king meant winning the war. They reached the throne room doors, barricaded, defended by elite guards wearing the crimson and gold of the royal household. These were not regular soldiers. These were men who had trained their entire lives for exactly this moment, defending the throne against impossible odds. The fighting was vicious. Selene watched people she had recruited die, watched farmers with pitchforks trying to kill professional warriors, watched courage fail against training and superior equipment. But courage had one advantage training could not match: willingness to die for something beyond survival. For every resistance fighter who fell, two more pushed forward, climbing over bodies, absorbing casualties that would break a professional army. The elite guards were outnumbered 10 to 1. They fought brilliantly, killed efficiently. But mathematics eventually won. The barricade fell. The doors to the throne room exploded open. Selene stumbled through, bleeding from a dozen wounds, barely able to stand, but alive, conscious, functional enough to keep moving. The throne room looked exactly as she remembered: obsidian pillars, crimson banners, the throne built from bones of defeated kingdoms. And sitting on that throne wearing a crown that looked too heavy was Tyrant Draven. He was not alone. 20 guards surrounded him, the best fighters the Empire possessed. And beside the throne stood Evelise, young, pregnant, terrified but trying to hide it behind noble composure. Theron looked at Selene like he was seeing a nightmare crawl out of hell. "You should be dead. I killed you. I destroyed you." Selene walked forward despite legs that barely supported her weight. "You tried. You failed. Turns out discarded women are harder to erase than you assumed." Kael appeared beside her, covered in blood, radiating lethal intent. More resistance fighters poured into the throne room, surrounding the final defenders, creating a circle with no escape. Theron stood, hand on his sword. "This is treason. You will all hang for this." Selene laughed. The sound was broken and bitter. "Treason implies we recognize your authority. We do not. You are just a frightened man wearing stolen legitimacy built on lies." She gestured to the fighters filling the room. "These people are not traitors. They are human beings who decided systematic cruelty was not acceptable anymore. That empires built on suffering deserved to burn." Theron's face twisted with rage. "I built this empire. I created prosperity and order from chaos. Everything you see was my vision. You built an empire on the backs of people you ground into dust. You created prosperity for nobles while children starved 3 streets from the palace. You maintained order through fear and violence. That is not vision. That is systematic oppression." She moved closer, close enough to see sweat on his face. "And you destroyed me publicly to hide the fact that you were the one who failed. You made my body the scapegoat for your inadequacy. You let the entire empire believe I was worthless because you could not admit weakness." Theron drew his sword. "Fight me then. Prove you deserve this throne more than I do." Selene looked at the blade, looked at Theron, understood what he was doing. He wanted personal combat, wanted to reduce revolution to individual conflict. If he killed her, he could claim the resistance died with her, could restore some illusion of control. She would not give him that satisfaction. "No. This is not about you and me anymore. This is about the system you represent and the people who are tearing it down. Then you are a coward, hiding behind others instead of facing me directly. I am a leader who understands that change requires more than personal revenge. But if you want to fight someone, fight me." Kael stepped forward, gold eyes blazing, looking every bit the predator he was. Theron's eyes went wide. "What are you? Your worst nightmare. 400 years of accumulated rage at empires like yours, at kings like you, at systems that destroy innocence to preserve power." Kael's transformation was terrifying, bones shifting, muscles expanding, the wolf emerging from human disguise. The guards surrounding Theron panicked, half dropped weapons and fled. The other half attacked desperately. Kael tore through them like they were made of paper. The slaughter took less than a minute. Then it was just Theron, Evelise, and a throne room full of resistance fighters who had fought through hell to reach this moment. Theron looked at Selene. "Please. Mercy. I will abdicate. Leave the empire. You can have everything. Now you beg. After everything you did, after everyone you destroyed, now you want mercy." Selene felt nothing looking at him. No satisfaction, no rage, just cold assessment. You do not get to beg for mercy after denying it to everyone else. You do not get to negotiate after spending years treating people like disposable resources. What do you want? I want you to understand what you created. I want you to feel what I felt standing in this room being discarded before everyone. I want you to know that your legacy is not empire or dynasty. It is cautionary tale about what happens when power corrupts absolutely. She turned to the resistance fighters. The choice is yours. He is the architect of your suffering. The symbol of everything we fought to destroy. What justice demands is your decision, not mine. The crowd moved forward. Slowly, inevitably. Theron looked at Ivelisse, young, pregnant, innocent except by association. Please, not her. She did nothing. Selene held up a hand, stopped the crowd. She looked at Ivelisse, saw a girl not much younger than herself, a girl who had been used as political pawn, who probably had no choice in any of this. You are free to go. Take whatever you need. Raise your child somewhere far from this empire. We do not punish people for being born into bad systems. Ivelisse looked shocked, grateful, terrified. She fled the throne room without looking back. Theron watched her go, then turned to face the crowd closing in. The last thing Selene saw was realization in his eyes, understanding that empires built on cruelty eventually destroy their creators. Then the crowd took him. She turned away, did not watch, did not need to. Justice was not her responsibility anymore. It belonged to the people he had oppressed. Kale stood beside her. It is done. The empire is yours if you want it. Selene looked at the throne, the crown, the symbols of power that had defined her life for a decade. Then she walked to the throne and pushed it over. The crash echoed through the chamber. I do not want the empire. I want something new. Something built by everyone instead of ruled by one person. What does that look like? I have no idea. But we figure it out together, or we fail together. The throne room fell silent. Then someone started cheering, then another, then the entire room erupted in celebration. But Selene felt no triumph, only exhaustion, pain, and the weight of hundreds of deaths that bought this moment. Kael wrapped an arm around her. You're bleeding again. We need to get you medical attention. Later. First, we secure the palace. Make sure there are no counterattacks. Establish order before chaos consumes what we just won. You are going to die from stubbornness, better than dying from weakness. They walked out of the throne room together, into corridors filled with fighters celebrating victory, into a palace that was no longer a symbol of oppression, but a symbol of change bought with blood. Outside, the city was transforming, red banners being torn down, people flooding into streets, nobles fleeing or surrendering. The empire had fallen. Now came the harder part, building something better from the ruins. Quotes. 3 days after taking the palace, Selene stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The fighting had stopped. The mercenaries arrived to find the war already over and negotiated payment to leave without fighting. Smart business decision. The casualties were staggering. Over 1,000 resistance fighters dead. Maybe 2,000 soldiers and civilians combined. The city looked like a war zone because it was won. But it was free. Free from Theron. Free from the system he represented. Free to become something new. Kale joined her on the balcony. The noble houses are requesting audience. They want to know who rules now, what happens to their positions and properties. Selene sighed. Tell them we are establishing a council, representatives from all districts. Decisions made collectively instead of by decree. Their positions and properties will be evaluated based on how they treated people during the old regime. That will terrify them. Good. Fear might make them consider treating people decently. What about you? What position do you take in this new government? Selene looked at the city, thought about the question. I do not want to rule. I want to serve. Want to help build systems that prevent another Theron from emerging. Beyond that, I have no idea what my role should be. Kale was quiet for a moment. Then figure it out with the same stubborn determination you used to destroy the old system. You did not survive everything just to become irrelevant in the world you created. She smiled. First real smile in weeks. What about you? What does the Wolf King do now that the Empire is dead? I stay, help rebuild. Make sure the new system does not replicate the old mistakes. And stay close to the woman who made me believe change was possible. He pulled her close. She leaned into him despite lingering pain from wounds that were healing slowly. This is not the end. This is just the beginning of a much longer fight. I know. Building is harder than destroying, but at least we are building something worth the effort. Below them, the city continued transforming. People clearing rubble, reopening shops, starting to rebuild lives interrupted by revolution. It would take years, maybe decades. maybe generations. But the foundation was laid. The system that destroyed Selene and countless others was gone. What replaced it would be determined by everyone instead of imposed by one person. That was worth everything they sacrificed. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind them. The council is gathering. They want to discuss food distribution and rebuilding priorities. Selene turned from the view. Then let us begin. The real work starts now. She walked inside, Kyle beside her, heading toward a future unknown but built on principles instead of cruelty. The rejected queen had become something more dangerous than royalty. She had become a catalyst for permanent change, and the empire that tried to erase her would be rebuilt by the people she inspired to fight for something better. The revolution was just beginning. 6 months after the revolution, Selene woke to sunlight instead of nightmares for the first time in memory. The royal chambers had been transformed. No longer a monument to imperial excess. The gold fixtures were melted down and distributed to rebuild destroyed neighborhoods. The expensive tapestries were sold to fund food programs. What remained was functional space for someone who worked rather than ruled. She stood at the window overlooking a city that still bore scars from battle but was healing. Construction noise replaced screaming. Markets reopened. Children played in streets that once ran with blood. Progress was visible but fragile, like new skin over deep wounds that could tear open with the wrong pressure. Kyle entered carrying documents that never seemed to stop arriving. The northern districts are reporting another grain shortage. The council wants to know if we should requisition from noble estates or negotiate imports from neighboring kingdoms. Selene rubbed her face. Governance was infinitely more exhausting than revolution. Revolution had clear enemies and simple objectives. Building something new required endless compromise and navigation of competing interests. What do the Northern District representatives recommend? They want both. Requisition enough to prevent immediate starvation. Negotiate imports to build sustainable supply lines. Then do both. And make sure the nobles whose grain we requisition understand this is not punishment. This is recognizing that food is not luxury for hoarding while people starve. Kyle made notes. His role had evolved from warrior to advisor to something resembling partner in the impossible task of rebuilding civilization from revolutionary ashes. There is something else. A delegation from the Eastern Kingdoms arrived last night. They want to discuss formal recognition of the new government and establishment of trade agreements. Recognition meant legitimacy. Meant other kingdoms accepted that Dravenor was no longer Theron's empire, that the revolution had produced something viable rather than just chaos. It also meant vulnerability. Once recognized officially, they could not claim to be internal resistance anymore. They became a government responsible for everything that happened within their borders. Schedule the meeting for this afternoon. I want Marcus and the Economic Council present. This is too important for individual decisions. Kale nodded. Started to leave. Stopped. You're different this morning. Calmer. I slept through the night without waking up, convinced soldiers were coming to execute me. That is progress. He smiled. The expression was rare and beautiful on his scarred face. The nightmares will fade. Give them time. Time was something Selene had in abundance now. No longer running, no longer hiding. Just the slow grinding work of proving that systems built on inclusion and accountability could function as well as systems built on oppression. Some days she believed it. Other days she wondered if they had just replaced one broken system with a different kind of broken. The council meeting that afternoon revealed exactly how fragile their new government remained. 20 representatives sat around a table that replaced the throne. Each represented a district or interest group. Farmers, merchants, workers, former soldiers. Even 2 representatives from noble houses that had supported the revolution. The Eastern Kingdom delegation presented their terms for recognition. A man named Ambassador Corella spoke with the careful precision of someone navigating political minefields. My kingdoms are prepared to recognize your government and establish trade relations. However, we require assurances regarding stability and continuity of leadership. What kind of assurances? That power transitions will be peaceful, that contracts negotiated today will be honored tomorrow, that we are not investing in a government that will collapse into civil war the moment internal disagreements arise. The concerns were legitimate. Revolutionary governments failed constantly because people who united against a common enemy fragmented once that enemy was gone. Selene looked at the council members, saw the fractures already forming. The farmer representatives wanted land redistribution immediately. The merchant representatives wanted stability and protection of property rights. The worker representatives wanted labor reforms. The noble representatives wanted assurance they would not be executed for crimes of the old regime. Every faction had legitimate grievances. Every faction wanted contradictory outcomes. This was the reality of governance that revolutionary rhetoric never addressed. You could unite people against oppression. Uniting them for construction was infinitely harder. She spoke carefully. We cannot guarantee there will be no disagreements. Democracy requires disagreement. But we can guarantee that disagreements will be resolved through council votes, an established process rather than violence. That contracts will be honored by whoever holds power, because power is distributed rather than concentrated. The ambassador considered that. And who holds ultimate authority if the council deadlocks? Who makes final decisions when consensus is impossible? The question everyone had been avoiding. They had destroyed monarchy but had not clearly defined what replaced it. Selene held a position of respect earned through leading the revolution, but no official title or authority. The ambiguity was intentional. Title meant hierarchy. Hierarchy meant someone could accumulate power and repeat Theron's mistakes. But ambiguity also meant paralysis when fast decisions were needed. Marcus spoke up. Ultimate authority rests with the council. If deadlock occurs, we hold public forums and let citizens guide resolution. Messy but democratic. Ambassador Corellis looked skeptical. That could take months for urgent decisions. What happens during external threats requiring immediate military response? Then we make mistakes and learn from them. But we do not recreate the systems that allowed one person to declare war and send thousands to die for personal glory. The ambassador exchanged glances with his delegation. This is not how kingdoms function. This is not how power works. Selene leaned forward. You are correct. This is not how kingdoms function. We are not a kingdom. We are an experiment in whether people can govern themselves collectively instead of being governed by someone who inherited authority through bloodline. And if the experiment fails, then we fail honestly rather than succeed through oppression. The room was silent. Finally, the ambassador spoke. My kingdoms will recognize your government provisionally. We will negotiate trade agreements with 6-month review periods. If you maintain stability and honor contracts, recognition becomes permanent. If you collapse into chaos, we renegotiate with whoever emerges from the rubble. It was not full acceptance. But it was enough. The council voted to accept the terms. 14 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 abstaining. Democracy in action. Messy, contentious, functional. After the delegation left, Kira pulled Selene aside. You're avoiding the leadership question. Eventually, the council will force you to take a title and authority, or they will replace you with someone willing to. I know. I am hoping we can build enough institutional structure that individual leadership becomes less important. That is naive. People want someone to follow, someone to blame when things go wrong, someone to celebrate when things go right. You can pretend authority does not exist, but that just makes it invisible instead of accountable. The observation was accurate and uncomfortable. What do you suggest? Accept a limited-term leadership role, maybe 5 years, with clear constraints on authority. Make yourself accountable to the council and subject to removal if you abuse power. Show that leadership does not have to mean monarchy. Selene had been resisting exactly that, because accepting any leadership role felt like becoming what she had destroyed. But Kira was right. Pretending leadership did not matter was naive. Better to formalize it with constraints than let informal authority grow unchecked. I will think about it. Think fast. The council meets again in 2 days, and the leadership question is on the agenda whether you like it or not. That night, Selene found Kael on the balcony overlooking the city. He stood perfectly still, watching, always watching. She joined him in silence. They had developed comfort with quiet over months of working together. Not everything required words. Finally, he spoke. You are struggling with the leadership question. Everyone wants me to accept formal authority. I keep resisting because I do not trust myself with power after watching what it did to Theron. You are not Theron. You already proved that by pushing over the throne instead of sitting on it. But power corrupts. That is not just a saying. That is observable reality. Good people become monsters when they have authority without accountability. Kyle turned to look at her. Then build accountability into whatever role you accept. Make yourself subject to removal. Make your decisions reviewable. Create systems that prevent any individual from accumulating the kind of power Theron had. That is what I'm trying to do. But people want simple hierarchy, want someone to tell them what to do and blame when things go wrong. Collective governance is uncomfortable. Everything worth building is uncomfortable at first. He moved closer. You survived being publicly destroyed, survived exile in frozen wilderness, survived betrayal and war and injuries that should have killed you. You did not survive all of that to fail because you are afraid of your own potential for corruption. I am not afraid of corruption. I am afraid of becoming the thing I destroyed. Then do not become that thing. Accept limited authority with built-in constraints. Serve for defined period. Then step away and let someone else lead. Show that power can be temporary instead of permanent. The logic was sound, but the fear was visceral. Power was seductive. She had watched it seduce Theron, watched it transform someone she loved into someone capable of destroying her without hesitation. What if I cannot step away when the time comes? What if 5 years of authority makes me believe I am indispensable? Then I will remind you of this conversation, and if necessary, I will remove you myself. The threat was delivered gently, but she believed it completely. You would kill me if I became a tyrant. I would stop you from becoming a tyrant. Killing would only be necessary if you refused to stop. Selene laughed despite the darkness of the conversation. You are a terrible romantic. Most people promise eternal devotion. You promise assassination if I abuse power. I promise honesty, which is worth more than devotion built on comfortable lies. He was right about that too. She leaned against him, felt the solid warmth of someone who had stood beside her through everything. I will accept the council's leadership role. Limited term. Clear constraints. Subject to removal. And you stay close enough to kill me if I forget why we fought this revolution. Deal. They stood together watching the city transform, watching people build futures from the ruins of the past. This was what victory looked like. Not triumph, not glory, just the slow, patient work of proving that better was possible. Mahawk. 2 days later, Selene accepted the role the council offered. The title was deliberately bland. Chief Administrator, not Queen, not Empress, not Monarch, just someone who coordinated governance and made decisions when the council delegated authority. 5-year term. Renewable once with 2/3 council vote. Subject to removal with simple majority if she violated established principles. The constraints were extensive, real, enforceable. She stood before the council and the citizens gathered to witness and spoke plainly. I accept this role knowing I will make mistakes. Knowing some decisions will harm people despite best intentions. Knowing that authority is burden rather than privilege. I will serve for 5 years and then step aside regardless of whether you want me to continue. Because the point is not my leadership. The point is proving that leadership can be temporary and accountable. The crowd was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the room erupted in applause. Not everyone was happy. Some wanted monarchy restored with Selene as queen. Some wanted pure democracy with no individual authority. Some wanted their factional interests prioritized over collective good. But enough people supported the compromise that it became viable. Government by enough rather than unanimous. Democracy in its messy, functional reality. The first 100 days were brutal. Food shortages required unpopular requisitions. Rebuilding required taxes that hurt people already struggling. Criminal justice required addressing crimes of the old regime without descending into revenge killings. Every decision alienated someone. Every compromise felt like betrayal to people who wanted absolute justice. Selene worked 18-hour days and still felt like she was failing. The difference between revolutionary rhetoric and actual governance was vast. Revolution promised everything. Governance delivered what was achievable, given limited resources and competing interests. She learned to accept small victories. A new school opening in a destroyed district. A food program preventing starvation. A criminal trial that delivered justice without mob violence. Progress measured in increments rather than transformation. 3 months into her term, a crisis erupted that tested everything. A noble house that supported the revolution was discovered to have been trafficking workers into slavery for profit, the same crime Theron had committed. the same systematic exploitation they had fought to destroy. The evidence was undeniable. The noble family claimed ignorance, but records showed direct involvement. The council demanded execution. The crowds demanded blood, justice for centuries of oppression. Selene understood the rage, felt it herself. But execution without trial meant abandoning the principles they had died to establish. She called an emergency council session. We established laws against summary execution for a reason. Because mob justice is not justice. It is revenge wearing moral disguise. If we execute this family without trial, we prove we learned nothing from Theron's brutality. The worker representative was furious. They enslaved children. They destroyed families. They deserve death and nothing less. Maybe they do. But we deserve to be better than the system we replaced. We deserve to prove that justice can exist without descending into the same cruelty we condemned. The debate raged for hours, voices raised, tempers flaring, the fragile coalition threatening to fracture. Finally, Marcus proposed a compromise. Trial. Public. Evidence presented. Defense allowed. Verdict determined by jury selected from the districts most harmed by slavery. If found guilty, punishment determined by the same jury. We follow our own laws even when we hate the people those laws protect. The council voted. Narrow margin. But enough. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence was damning. The defense was minimal because there was no defense for systematic enslavement. The jury found the family guilty. The sentence was permanent exile and seizure of all property to compensate victims. Not death. But justice according to the principles they had established. The crowds were angry, wanted blood, wanted revenge. But they accepted it because the process was transparent, and the jury was made of people who had suffered most. Selene watched the family being escorted beyond the borders and felt no satisfaction. Just exhaustion. Just the recognition that justice was complicated and uncomfortable and often unsatisfying to everyone involved. But it was justice, not revenge. Justice. That night, Kael found her alone in her chambers. "You look like you fought a war today." "I feel like I did. Half the city hates me for not executing them. The other half thinks I am too harsh. Everyone is angry. That means you probably made the right decision. When everyone is equally unhappy, it usually means you found actual balance. Balance feels like failure. Balance is the only sustainable victory. Extremes are comfortable. They provide clarity, but they also provide tyranny in one direction or another." He sat beside her. "You did the hard thing today. You chose principles over popularity. That is leadership. Leadership feels like disappointing everyone simultaneously. Welcome to governance. The job description is managing disappointment while preventing catastrophe." Selene laughed despite exhaustion. "How do you stay sane watching this? Watching me struggle. I remind myself that struggling means you are trying. Theron never struggled because he never cared if decisions harmed people. You struggle because you do care. That difference matters." She leaned against him, felt the solid presence of someone who had witnessed her transformation from broken exile to reluctant leader. "What happens when my 5 years are up? What do I become if I am not this? You become whoever you choose. The beautiful thing about limiting your own power is that life exists after authority. You get to discover who you are without the burden of leadership." The thought was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. 5 years. She had 5 years to prove that good governance was possible. Then she would step away and let someone else try, if she survived that long. Kit. Year 2 brought external threats that internal governance could not address. The southern kingdoms watched Dravenor's experiment with growing concern. Democracy was contagious. If it succeeded here, their own populations might demand similar changes. Better to destroy the experiment before it inspired revolution elsewhere. 3 southern kingdoms formed an alliance, 50,000 troops, professional armies that dwarfed anything Dravenor could field. The official justification was restoring legitimate monarchy. The real reason was preventing democratic infection. The council debated for days. Some wanted to fight, some wanted to negotiate, some wanted to surrender and hope for mercy. Selene listened to every position, heard the fear underneath all of them. They had built something fragile and beautiful, and now violence threatened to crush it before it could mature. She spoke when the debate finally exhausted itself. We cannot defeat 50,000 professional soldiers with the forces we have. Fighting means glorious death and nothing else. But surrendering means abandoning everything we built. So we find a third option. What third option exists? We make the cost of invasion higher than the southern kingdoms are willing to pay. We show them that destroying us means fighting every civilian, burning every city, killing every person. We make occupation impossible even if they win militarily. You're talking about guerrilla resistance, about turning the entire population into combatants. I'm talking about making it clear that conquering territory does not mean conquering people, that we would rather die resisting than live under monarchy again. The council voted to prepare for resistance, not conventional war, total refusal to submit. Messages went out to every district, every village, every farm. If the southern kingdoms invade, we do not surrender. We fight from every street, every building, every shadow. We make Dravenor unconquerable even if they occupy every city. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People armed themselves, prepared defenses, made it clear that invasion would mean endless bleeding. The southern kingdoms received the message, understood the implications. Occupation of a hostile population was expensive, brutal, often failed despite military superiority. They negotiated instead. Ambassador Corellis returned with new terms. The southern kingdoms would recognize Dravenor's government and establish trade if Dravenor agreed not to actively encourage revolution in neighboring territories. The compromise was acceptable. Selene had no interest in exporting revolution through force. If other populations wanted change, they would have to build it themselves. The treaty was signed. The invasion never happened. Victory through demonstrating that the cost of war exceeded the value of conquest. Kael congratulated her privately. You avoided war through credible threat of making peace impossible. That is strategic brilliance. That is desperation dressed as strategy. If they had called our bluff, we would all be dead. They did not call it because your population proved they meant it. That credibility came from months of watching you build something worth defending. The observation was accurate. The resistance worked because people believed in what they were protecting, believed enough to die for it. That kind of belief could not be manufactured or commanded. It had to be earned through demonstrating that governance served people rather than exploiting them. But year 4 brought personal crisis that threatened everything. Selene discovered she was pregnant. The revelation was impossible. The diagnosis of barrenness had defined her exile, had destroyed her marriage, had been the foundation of Theron's betrayal. But the medical records proved Theron was infertile, not her. The diagnosis was fabricated. Still, pregnancy after a decade of trying felt like reality breaking. She told Kael first. He stared at her for a long moment, then smiled wider than she had ever seen. Well, that is unexpected. Unexpected barely covers it. I spent 10 years believing my body was broken, spent months watching Theron marry someone else because I supposedly could not conceive. And now this. Now you discover that everything you were told about yourself was a lie designed to protect his ego. She sat down heavily. Processing. A child. She was going to have a child. The implications were staggering, personal, political, philosophical. Personally, it meant confronting everything she believed about herself. The identity built around being barren, the grief of assumed infertility. All of it was based on lies. Politically, it meant succession questions. If she had an heir, would people expect that heir to inherit authority? Would they pressure her to establish a dynasty? Everything they had fought against. Kael sat beside her. What do you want to do? I want to keep it. Want to raise a child in a world where biological function does not determine worth. Want to prove that parenthood can exist without creating hereditary authority. Then do that. Have your child, raise them well, and make it clear that they inherit nothing except the responsibility to build their own purpose. The council was less comfortable with the announcement. Some celebrated, some worried about succession, some questioned whether she should step down to focus on motherhood. Selene addressed the concerns directly. I am pregnant, not incapacitated. I will continue serving my term. I will not establish hereditary succession. My child will be raised as a citizen, not as royalty. And anyone who suggests pregnancy makes me unfit for leadership can go fuck themselves. The bluntness shocked some council members, but it also ended the debate. She worked through the pregnancy. attended council meetings, made decisions, proved that biological function and political capacity were unrelated. The child was born healthy, a girl with gold-flecked eyes that suggested her father's heritage. Selene named her Arya. Not a royal name, just a name she liked. No ceremony, no proclamation, no suggestion that this child was anything except a person born into a world that valued people for who they became rather than what they inherited. Kael was besotted. Watching the ancient wolf king reduced to cooing at an infant was both absurd and beautiful. You are terrible at this. She is not a weapon that needs combat training. She will be eventually. But for now, she just needs someone who will keep her alive and teach her that the world is not entirely terrible. Selene watched him holding Arya and felt something settling in her chest. Not completion, just contentment. The sense that despite everything, something good had emerged from the ruins. Year 5 arrived faster than seemed possible. Her term was ending. She had agreed to step down. Had built that constraint into the very foundation of her authority. But people were asking her to stay, to accept renewal, to continue leading because transition was scary and uncertain. The temptation was real. She had invested 5 years in building this government, had sacrificed and bled and worked herself nearly to death making it functional. Walking away felt like abandoning something fragile, but staying felt like betraying the principles that made it worth building. Kael found her wrestling with the decision. You are going to step down. We both know it. The question is whether you need me to remind you why or if you can remind yourself. Selene looked at him, at Arya sleeping peacefully nearby, at the city visible through the window. I want to stay. I want to see this through to something more stable. It will never be stable. Stability is illusion. Change is constant. If you wait for stability before stepping down, you will never step down. I know. I just hate leaving when there is so much unfinished. There will always be unfinished work. That is the nature of governance. The point is demonstrating that authority can be temporary, that people can lead and then return to being citizens. You are right. I know you are right. I just need to convince myself to follow through. Then let me help. Imagine Arya growing up watching you cling to power because you decided you were indispensable. Imagine teaching her that promises can be broken when they become inconvenient. Is that the lesson you want her to learn? The question cut through every rationalization. No. I want her to learn that principles matter even when they cost us something we value. Then step down. Show her that power is a tool for service, not possession for hoarding. Selene made her decision. The announcement was simple, direct. My 5-year term ends in 30 days. I will not seek renewal. The council should begin the process of selecting my replacement. I will spend my remaining time ensuring smooth transition, and then I will step aside as promised. The reaction was mixed. Some celebrated, some protested. The council scrambled to establish selection process for new leadership. 3 candidates emerged. Marcus, Kira, and a woman named Yana who had led the agricultural reforms. All 3 were qualified. All 3 had different visions for what came next. The campaign was contentious but nonviolent. Debates, public forums, actual democracy in action. Selene watched and did not interfere, did not endorse, just ensured the process remained fair and transparent. Yana won with narrow majority. She would become the second chief administrator of Dravenor, someone who had not led the revolution, someone without Selene's history or baggage, someone who could build on the foundation without being trapped by it. Perfect. The transition ceremony was deliberately modest. No crowns, no grand speeches, just formal transfer of authority in front of the council and assembled citizens. Selene spoke briefly. 5 years ago, we destroyed a system built on inherited authority and systematic cruelty. We promised to build something better, something accountable, something temporary. Today, I fulfill that promise by stepping aside and returning to citizenship. Yana will lead now. And when her term ends, she will step aside and someone else will lead. This is how we prevent the accumulation of power that corrupts. This is how we prove that democracy can function. She handed over the administrative seal, symbol of limited authority. Yana accepted it with visible nervousness. You are leaving me with an impossible job and a population that expects miracles, Selene smiled. Welcome to leadership. The job description is managing disappointment while preventing catastrophe. You will do fine." Then she walked away. No longer chief administrator, just Selene, citizen, mother, person trying to figure out what came next. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating. 1 year after stepping down, Selene stood in the same spot where she had been exiled 6 years earlier. The northern border, the edge of the Black Veil, the place where her old life ended and transformation began. Kael stood beside her, Arya on his shoulders. The girl was 2 now and filled with questions about everything. "Why are we here, Mama?" Selene looked at the wilderness that had almost killed her. "Because this is where I learned that being destroyed does not mean staying broken. That the world does not bury people who fall. It plants them. And what grows from that planting depends on what we choose to become." Arya processed that with the seriousness of a child who had not yet learned that some things were metaphors. "Did you grow into something good?" Selene considered the question. Thought about everything that happened since that night 6 years ago. The suffering, the violence, the compromises, the small victories. "I grew into something complicated, but yes, something good came from the ruins." Kyle added his perspective. "She grew into someone who changed the world by refusing to let the world define her worth." Arya seemed satisfied with that answer. They walked back toward the city together. No longer chief administrator and wolf king and heir to anything, just family, just people navigating life after achieving what seemed impossible. Dravenor continued without Selene's direct leadership. Yana made different decisions, some better, some worse. The council adapted. The population adjusted. Democracy functioned imperfectly, but it functioned. Selene found work teaching. Nothing grand or important, just helping young people understand history and governance and why principles mattered even when they cost something. She told students about the revolution, about the mistakes, about the price paid in blood and suffering, about why they could never take their freedom for granted because freedom required constant, vigilant protection. Some students were inspired, some were bored, most were somewhere in between. But they were learning in a system that valued education for everyone instead of reserving knowledge for the privileged. That was worth everything. Kael built a school for human and wolf children together, teaching them that difference was not threat, that cooperation was possible despite biological and cultural divides. The first generation raised without automatic suspicion between species. Progress. Arya grew up surrounded by people who had fought to destroy the old world and build something new. She absorbed lessons about resistance and accountability and the difference between authority and authoritarianism. She would face her own challenges, her own choices, her own battles, but she would face them in a world that valued her for who she became rather than who she was born to be. That was the victory. Not military triumph, not political power. The victory was creating space for people to become fully human instead of being reduced to biological functions or inherited status. 10 years after the revolution, Selene received an unexpected visitor, a young woman who looked familiar, but whom Selene could not immediately place. Then recognition hit. Evelise, Theron's widow, the girl who fled the throne room pregnant and terrified. She looked different, older, obviously, but also harder, stronger. She had a child with her, a boy maybe 9 years old with Theron's eyes. Selene invited them to sit, uncertain what this visit meant. Evelise spoke first. "I came to thank you." "For what?" "I destroyed your husband and took everything you had. You freed me from a life that would have destroyed me slowly." Theron was monster hiding behind crown and masculine pride. "I was 19 and stupid and thought being queen meant something. You showed me it meant nothing except servitude to a system designed to exploit everyone." The bitterness in her voice was earned. "What did you do after you left?" "I went east. Raised my son far from empires and politics. Taught him that authority earned through fear is not worth having. Told him his father was cautionary tale about what happens when ego replaces humanity." She looked at the boy. "His name is Theron. I kept the name but changed what it represents. He will grow up knowing his namesake was everything a person should not become. The choice was either cruel or brilliant. Possibly both. Why come back now? Why risk returning to a place where you could be arrested for association with the old regime?" "Because I wanted my son to see what replaced the empire his father ruled. wanted him to understand that better is possible even after everything seems destroyed. Selene looked at the boy, saw curiosity instead of entitlement, saw someone being raised to question rather than command. You are raising him well. I am raising him to be human instead of king. That is the only legacy worth passing down. They talked for hours. Two women who had been enemies through circumstance rather than choice. Two women who survived the same system through different paths. When Evelise left, Selene felt something shifting. The last piece of Theron's ghost finally releasing its hold. He was gone. Not just dead, but irrelevant. Replaced by people who learned from his failures instead of repeating them. That night, Selene stood on the balcony overlooking the city one more time. Kale joined her, pattern repeated across a decade. You look peaceful. I feel finished, like the story that started 6 years ago in that throne room finally reached its ending. Stories do not end. They just transform into different stories. Then I am ready for the different story. The one where I am not defined by what was done to me. Where I am just person living life instead of symbol of revolution. Kale wrapped his arms around her. That story already started. You just needed to recognize it. Below them the city continued. Lights flickering, people living, democracy functioning imperfectly, but functioning. Selene thought about the woman she had been. The queen who stood in that throne room being publicly destroyed. Who believed her worth was tied to biological function and male approval. That woman died in the snow. What emerged was someone who understood that worth was inherent, that power was temporary, that change required sacrifice, but also required knowing when to step back and let others lead. The lessons were written in scar tissue and grief and small victories accumulated over years of grinding work. But they were real, permanent, transferable to the next generation. Arya would grow up in a world that valued her autonomy, that recognized biological difference without making it destiny, that understood governance was service rather than dominion. Not perfect, never perfect, but better, always reaching for better. That was the revolution's true victory. Not destroying Theron, not taking the palace, not even building democratic institutions. The victory was proving that people could change, that systems built on cruelty could be dismantled, that better was possible if people were willing to fight for it, and then willing to step aside when their part was finished. Selene had done her part. Now it belonged to others. She was finally free. Not free from responsibility or consequence, but free from the belief that her value depended on external validation. Free from the need to prove herself worthy to people whose judgment was based on lies. Free to simply exist as fully human person in a world that was learning to value humanity over hierarchy. The rejected queen had become something more important than royalty. She had become herself. And that was enough. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she held Kael close and watched the world she helped create continue without her direct intervention. Tomorrow there would be challenges, problems, conflicts requiring resolution. But tonight there was peace, hard-earned, blood-bought, real. She had survived being broken, had transformed suffering into purpose, had built something that would outlast her. And now she could rest knowing that the empire which tried to erase her would never forget the woman who rose from its ashes and taught it what strength actually meant. Not dominance, not control, but the courage to change when change was necessary, and the wisdom to step aside when stepping aside served the greater good. That was power. That was legacy. That was enough.